Wonderful. Welcome, distinguished conference. I'd like to introduce myself. Good morning to you all. My name is Zoltán Vajda. I'm the chair of the Committee on the Budget of this Parliament, the Hungarian National Assembly. And in my capacity as one of the co-hosts of this conference, please allow me to welcome you to this, the second day of this third interparliamentary event of the Hungarian EU Presidency. I'd like to thank you all for accepting our invitation and being with us today. I hope you had a fruitful discussion at yesterday's session, and also I hope, on a personal note, that you enjoyed the culture program and dinner last night. Before we start our second session, allow me to recall a few technical details for you all. First of all, we provide English and French interpretation during the meeting, as well as German, Italian, Spanish, and Serbian. You may ask our colleagues in the room for any help if you need anything to select the languages that you'd prefer. I would like to inform you that both the microphone and the headphones can be found in the drawers inside your desks, inside or under your desks. You are kindly asked to speak from your seat using the microphones. It is not necessary to press any button to indicate your wish to speak, as the microphones will be automatically activated according to the order of the speakers. As per the standing order of the Hungarian National Assembly, it is not allowed to bring any food or drinks inside the plenary hall. But there are coffee and refreshments which are waiting for you outside of the corridor continuously. So now, having had your attention, thank you for that. I'd like to turn to the substantive part of our conference. And I would like to open the second session of the conference. And if you allow me, I will have a short introductory presentation with PPT slides, which hopefully you will see behind me, and you actually see it already behind me. So once again, distinguished colleagues and dear guests, I am honored to address you today, now as a speaker, on the topic of the Stability and Growth Pact, ensuring fiscal discipline and stability across the EU. As we are all aware, maintaining fiscal stability in the European Union is essential for the prosperity and the resilience of our economies. So today, with your permission, very shortly, I will present an overview of the Stability and Growth Pact, its significance, its challenges, and the recent reforms that aim to strengthen its effectiveness. The Stability and Growth Pact, or SGP, as you all know, was established in 1997 as a crucial mechanism for coordinating national fiscal policies within the European Union. Its primary purpose was to facilitate and maintain the stability of the economic and monetary union by ensuring that member states do not engage in fiscal behaviors that could lead to excessive deficits or unsustainable levels of debt. The SGP operates under two council regulations that function as its core arms. The first one is the so-called preventive arm, which focuses on strengthening the surveillance of budgetary positions and ensuring the coordination of economic policies. This obviously helps member states to stay on course with fiscal targets before imbalances arise. The second one is the corrective arm, that deals with the enforcement of the excessive deficit procedure, and it clarifies the process for addressing violations when a member state exceeds the deficit or the debt limits. In essence, the SGP ensures that no country's economic imbalances negatively impact the broader EU economy, thereby safeguarding collective economic stability. The SGP serves a dual purpose. First, it is designed to ensure fiscal stability, thereby safeguarding the long-term viability of the EU's economic framework. Second, it promotes sustainable and inclusive growth across all member states, and the Pact's objectives extend beyond mere budgetary control. It's emphasizing the need for coordination among member states and acting as a preventive shield against potential crises. In addition to these key aims, the SGP also seeks to improve policy coordination between member states and plays a vital role in crisis prevention. By adhering to the rules set out in the SGP, we can mitigate risks and ensure that our economies are prepared for unforeseen economic shocks. By adhering to these fiscal principles, the SGP ensures that the Union is better prepared for financial shocks while maintaining a foundation for economic resilience. The SGP is built upon two fundamental fiscal rules. First is the deficit rule. I have it actually in the opposite order, so I can first talk about the debt rule, which is where national debt must not exceed 60% of GDP, and we have the deficit rule, meaning that each government's fiscal deficit must be maintained below 3% of GDP. These two rules, in essence, form the core of fiscal discipline within the EU. They serve to prevent irresponsible fiscal policies that could destabilize individual economies and, by extension, obviously, the whole of the EU. Adherence to these criteria is essential for ensuring the long-term fiscal health of the EU. These graphs on this slide and the one on the next one is actually in your background notes, which were distributed, so I'm using the same source. As you can see on these graphs, between 2015 and 2023, the debt levels in EU countries fluctuated significantly, with some member states maintaining discipline while others struggled due to economic crises. Obviously, the COVID crisis proved a difficult period for all countries. So tracking these trends is, in my opinion, vital for understanding the fiscal health of the EU as a whole. This next set of graphs shows similarly the deficit levels, how these have varied significantly, particularly, again, in response to global economic challenges, once again, including the COVID pandemic and other financial crises. Monitoring these deficits is critical for maintaining the stability of the EMU. I'd like to turn now to talk about the excessive deficit procedure, or EDP, which is the SGP's enforcement mechanism. It is activated when a member state breaches either the 3% deficit threshold or the 60% debt to GDP ratio. When this happens, the European Commission closely monitors the country's fiscal performance and issues recommendations for corrective action. At present, as you can see on these slides, these are the member states which are under the EDP, including Italy, my beloved country Hungary, France, Poland, Malta, Slovakia, and Belgium, with Romania also having exceeded this acceptable threshold for some time. So for these countries, it is essential that they follow the Commission's recommendations to return to fiscal discipline. On this slide, I'd like to show you the actual dates of adoption of central budgets of member states, because although the typical adoption dates of central budgets somewhat varies from country to country, we can see that all EU member states, with the notable exception of my home country, Hungary, passed their budget legislation at the end of or very close to the end of the calendar year. In recent years, we have seen both progress and setbacks in fiscal discipline across the Union. While some member states have been successful in maintaining discipline, others have faced considerable difficulties. This graph shows between 2019 and 2023, an average, between these years, the average discrepancies between the planned and the actual budget deficit of the country. You can see, hopefully it's visible, that 20 of the 27 countries have, to various degrees, exhibited worse actual data than planned, while 7 countries actually outperformed the plan. The EU average between these discrepancies, between the planned and the actual deficit, is about 0.5%, which means that the actual figure is worse by this degree than the planned. Obviously, it's obvious that some underperformance can be explained by external shocks and perhaps domestic political pressures. However, some countries' huge discrepancies cannot be explained by this and must require further study. To maintain fiscal discipline is not without its challenges. Several factors can complicate a country's ability to adhere to the SGP's rules. On this slide, I summarize 3 of the most obvious. Economic shocks, where global crises such as recessions or the pandemic can often lead to increased public spending and reduced revenues, pushing member states closer to breaching the pact's thresholds. Furthermore, we can talk about, obviously, political pressures. Election years, governments very often feel that they're compelled to increase spending to maybe somehow satisfy electoral promises or even populist demands, even at the expense of fiscal responsibility. And finally, but obviously, there are forecasting errors where inaccurate projections of key economic variables such as growth, inflation, and tax revenues can in fact undermine fiscal plans, which can lead to unintended fiscal imbalances. Recognizing these challenges, the EU introduced significant reforms to the SGP in April of 2024. These reforms aimed to strike a better balance between enforcing fiscal discipline and promoting long-term sustainable growth. Key aspects of these reforms include the following: a greater emphasis on sustainable and inclusive growth, recognizing that fiscal discipline should not come at the cost of broader economic progress. The second reform is about increased flexibility, where governments can invest in crucial areas such as green and digital transitions, which are vital for the future. Thirdly, there's a new monitoring framework that improves oversight of national fiscal plans and ensures greater accountability, which includes, amongst others, an enhanced national ownership of fiscal policies through medium-term planning tailored to the specific challenges of each member state. Also, there's a simpler, clearer rules that better reflect the varying fiscal risks and circumstances faced by individual countries. And also, there's a strengthened enforcement to ensure that member states remain committed to the principles of fiscal responsibility. These reforms are those that are designed to modernize the SGP and ensure that it remains effective in a rapidly changing global economy. And finally, in terms of conclusion, I'd just like to say that the Stability and Growth Pact is essential for maintaining fiscal stability and promoting economic prosperity across the European Union. By adhering to these fundamental criteria, again, maintaining deficits below 3% of GDP and national debt under 60%, member states contribute to a stronger and more resilient European economy. The recent reforms introduced in this year will ensure that the pact continues to serve the dual goals of fiscal discipline and sustainable growth in the years to come. So once again, I'd like to encourage all member states to remain committed to these objectives and to work collectively toward a stable and prosperous future for Europe. Thank you. Having said this, so now I turn back to my position as a chair. So now, in line with the agenda of this session, I would kindly like to ask Mr. Péter Benő Banai, who is the State Secretary for Public Finances of the Ministry of Finance of Hungary, to provide us from below here, in front of me from the pulpit, the views of the Hungarian government on our topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear distinguished members of national parliaments and the European Parliament, dear ladies and gentlemen, I've got the privilege to talk about the new economic governance framework from the point of view of the Hungarian Minister of Finance. As mentioned by the Chair, we have a new regulation in place from this spring, and this is the issue we have to handle together. And in my slides, I will talk about the main points of this new economic governance framework, and there will be some overlapping with Mr. Vajda. So the starting point as regards the indicators, is the budget deficit. One might ask a simple question: what is the aim of fiscal policy? We can say that the one aim of fiscal policy is to support the well-being of a nation, and to do so, a good budgetary policy should be anti-cyclical. So in case of bad times, in case of economic contraction, the budget should help the economy to keep the employment level at a higher number, to help the real economy to overcome the problems. That's what we've seen in the last decade, after the crisis of 2008-2009, when the deficit went up. And in good times, there was a possibility to reduce the budget deficit. Then came the COVID crisis, then came the war in Ukraine, and the strict rules on Maastricht criteria were lifted. And that's why we have seen, in line with the changed legal framework, in line with the changed economic situation, the deficit in all the member states, and of course in Hungary as well, went seriously up. But this was the aim of the fiscal policy, to give support to the real economy. Let me tell you that in Hungary, one very important aim of the government elected in 2010 was to increase employment. Hungary is a nation of 10 million people. Total employment has increased in the last decade by 1 million people. So the aim of the fiscal policy in Hungary was to keep employment at the mentioned high level, to maintain the additional 1 million workplace. We were successful, but to reach this goal, we needed to significantly increase the budget deficit, similarly to other member states. Let me mention that in those years, I remember statements from officials of the European Commission who said that it was a bigger mistake to have a too tight budgetary policy than to have a too loose budgetary policy. All in all, I think we were successful in the European Union. We could overcome the main problems, but still we have many challenges ahead. We can count on GDP growth, and parallelly with the GDP growth, we should lower the deficit. And as mentioned by Mr. Vajda, the chair, we have the new economic governance framework in place. Let me mention the second indicator. The second indicator on budgetary policy is the level of state debt. We see that if I look at the EU average number, which is in orange, and if I look at the Hungarian number, which is in black, we see that in the second half of the last decade, the EU average debt level could decrease. And we see that the Hungarian debt level was in a declining path in the last decade. Let me mention here that it was only Malta and Hungary who could reduce year by year the debt level in the last decade. And this was supported not just by the, at that time in place EU regulations, but it was supported by the strict national legislation as well. And here I should mention that we have in Europe the Stability and Growth Pact, but many member states have separate legislations. We have Mr. Gábor Horváth here, who is the chair of the Fiscal Council, and I mention this because in Hungary we have a constitution, a Hungarian base law, which says that all time governments have to prepare and implement a budget, which is us in debt reduction. Practically, we have a stricter regulation laid down in the Hungarian constitution than the EU legislation. We have to follow this strict policy up until that reaches 50% of GDP, not 60, but 50%. The only escape clause is in case of GDP contraction, because in that case, in line with the anti-cyclical budgetary policy, we should increase the deficit and we can increase the debt. The other escape clause is linked to special legal circumstances. So in line with the national legislation, in line with the EU legislation, which practically was lifted, as I've said, from 2020 to 2023, and in line with the anti-cyclical budgetary policy, In all the member states and in Hungary as well, in 2020 the debt increased significantly. From that time we can keep in Hungary the debt in a declining path. And we have a third very important indicator we have to learn about. Because if one thinks about the Maastricht criteria, then he or she can think about the deficit and the debt. But there's a third indicator in the mentioned new economic governance framework which has a special significance, and that is the so-called structural primary balance. So if I look at the deficit numbers for this year, then I see that the average deficit of the EU countries are declining, but still it's very high. This year, the bulk of the member states have a deficit above 3%, or a debt above 60%, or both. Deficits and debts are declining, but again, they are still high. But if I look at the so-called structural primary balance, then the situation is much better in all the member states. You can see on the right side of this slide of this presentation the so-called structural primary balance. On the left side, you can see the deficit targets for this year. What's the difference between the deficit target and the structural primary balance? The structural primary balance takes into account three factors. The first factor is the cyclical position of the real economy. The second factor are the one-offs on the revenue or expenditure side of the budget. And the third factor is interest payment or state debt, which cannot be influenced on a short period. So we see that practically, as regards the so-called structural primary balance, the situation is much better in all the member states and in Hungary as well. You can see the Hungarian number in black. As regards the headline, so-called headline deficit, the normal deficit, we are targeting a 4.5% deficit targeted percent of GDP. If I look at the structural primary balance, that can be in positive for this year. As I've said, one important difference between the so-called headline deficit and the structural primary balance is the payment on interest. And that is an issue in almost all the member states, and that is an issue in the case of the EU budget as well. Why do I say this? When the COVID came in line with the anti-cyclical budgetary policies, all the member states have increased the deficit. The debt went up. Then came the war in Ukraine. Inflation went seriously up. Financing costs went seriously up. Let me mention that the 10 years German bond, the Bund, so to say, had a yield in zero for many consecutive years before the COVID. Again, 10 years German bonds, yield in minus. Now it's around 2.5. We are dealing with the EU budget for 2025. In the EU budget, originally, for financing costs of the so-called next generation EU, for financing the bonds issued by the European Commission under the Recovery and Resilience funds, the European Commission has calculated with interest costs for 2025 at the amount of 2.5 billion euros. Now we have to pay more than 5 billion euros. So interest costs went seriously up, in percentage point of GDP as well. That is seen in the columns in the case of the European average and in the case of Hungary as well. So in the new economic framework, as mentioned by Mr. Vajda, and I completely agree with the chair, that we have to decrease the deficit and debt levels because we have, I think, very important economic factor, the expensive financing of state debt, and we have the new regulation in place from this year, which stresses the member states to keep budgetary policy which results in deficit and debt reduction. But we have some differences in the new economic governance framework. I have compared the previous legislation and the previous stability and convergence programs which had to be submitted to the European Commission with the new so-called fiscal structural plans. One very important difference is the indicators we have to look at. While previously the focus was on deficit and debt, now the focus is on not just on deficit and debt, but on the so-called structural position, which is somehow measured by the so-called net expenditure path. I will talk about that later. As regards the other indicators, the deficit should be kept not just below 3%, but all the member states should reach the so-called medium-term objective, which is 1.5%. So the message is that we cannot stop decreasing the deficit when we reach the 3%. Member states should target a more ambitious deficit target, which is 1.5% of GDP. As regards the debt, we have still the 60% limitation, but those member states where the debt is above 90% of GDP, they should decrease the debt annually by 1 percentage point. As regards those member states where the debt is above 60 but below 90, this ratio is only 0.5% of GDP. Previously, the stability and convergence programs should be submitted to the European Commission every year. Now all the member states have to submit a plan in this year with the time frame of 2025 to 2028. And in the coming years, they only have to reflect to the program, to the document, the fiscal structural plan submitted to the European Commission. Previously, besides the stability and convergence programs, all the member states had to submit a so-called national reform program, which included reforms and investment plans. Now there's only one document, so these reforms and investment plans are incorporated into the fiscal and structural plans. And if a member state says that he thinks that there's a serious need for additional investments, then the mentioned member state can reduce the deficit and debt in not 4 years, which is described as a normal rule in EU legislation, but in 7 years. Having said this, again, we have a new indicator we have to focus on. That is the mentioned structural position of the budget. And the European Commission checks reaching the goals, reaching the deficit and debt reduction by giving a so-called next expenditure growth plan to the member states. So all the member states got a pass on next expenditure growth. This next expenditure can grow with GDP volume and GDP deflator minus annual average adjustment need by which the medium-term objective can be reached till the end of the plan. To be very simple, the higher the adjustment needed, the lower the total expenditure can grow from one year to another. In Hungary, we hope that we will be able to keep the deficit and debt on a declining path. In line with the new EU legislation, we hope that we can turn the so-called structural primary balance from negative to positive. We hope that we can reach this in this year. And with these indicators, we can keep the debt in a declining path, as described by the new EU economic governance framework and in line with the national constitution. Of course, to reach these goals, to have the deficit and debt on a declining path, we need economic growth. And I finish my presentation with stating to the importance of economic growth and competitiveness. Because yes, from this year on, we have the new economic governance framework. Yes, we all have to reduce the deficit and debts, but we can reach this only by having significant growth in whole Europe. I know that this is an issue for a separate meeting, But again, I think that is an issue we have to talk about in the future. That is a question of competitiveness. I hope that we can find the answers on the questions on how to increase the competitiveness of the European Union as a whole, how to reach a significant GDP growth in the EU as a whole. And if we find the right answers, then I'm sure that we can keep the deficits and debts on a declining path. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. State Secretary. On a personal note, it was wonderful to hear that we have some points of agreement. Thank you for mentioning those. Politically, I think we're on opposite ends of the spectrum, and I'm sure we have quite many domestic differences, but it was great that in this setting we can amplify our points of agreement, and I agree with those as well, so thank you for that. And now I would like to turn to our second lecturer, Mr. Balázs Romhányi, who is the director of the Fiscal Responsibility Institute, which is based in Budapest, and I'd like to kindly ask you to please deliver your lecture again from the pulpit right here. And then we'll turn to you all for discussions.
Ladies and gentlemen, I feel very honored to be able to speak to this distinguished audience. The Fiscal Responsibility Institute is a non-government organization, and we are part of a network of civil society organizations around the world that produces the so-called Open Budget Survey. I know that many of you know about these surveys, but many of you probably not, because your countries are not covered. That's why I will shortly introduce this survey. Yeah, okay, thank you. So this Open Budget Survey is surveying fiscal transparency and oversight, including parliamentary oversight in the countries that are covered. It has a methodology that is consistent across the countries. It is objective in the sense that it's not a perception index. It's about questions that are objectively answerable, and the answers are proven. It is produced by an independent organization. It is produced every second year, and it consists of 3 parts. The so-called Open Budget Index, which is about transparency, about oversight by parliaments and the state audit offices, and about public participation. Of course, in this conference, the most interesting part is the second one, which is about oversight. The whole survey covers now something like 130 countries, but even at the beginning of this period of last 8 years, at least 115 were covered. Basically, half of the EU member states and all the EU candidate countries for now. Unfortunately, I haven't found data for Kosovo, but the candidate countries are all covered now. The first statement is that according to this survey, over the last 8 years, where there were 4 surveys, parliamentary oversight, as measured by a number of questions in this survey, has slightly but declined, both in the EU member states and in the candidate countries. One of the key elements of this index, as part of one question is, did the parliamentary committee control the execution of the budget during the year? So not in the planning phase, not in the ex-post audit phase, but during the year. And here we see that there was a significant drop in these 8 years, not only, and let's be clear, not only due to COVID, because this trend already started before COVID. From 2017 to 2019, there was a decline in this. This is surprising. Sorry, where shall I target this? Köszönöm. Akkor. Igen, csak most nem ennek a diának kéne lennie. Vissza kellene menni a... Így voltunk, és most ez. Igen, köszönöm. Sorry for this. It's surprising that in more and more countries, governments produce the so-called mid-year review. Those who are familiar with the Open Budget Survey, those probably know what a mid-year review is, but some of you might not know. Mid-year review is produced in the middle of the year or slightly after, when the first half of the year data are already available, and this is a review that assesses the current situation of the budget at a very detailed level. This is much more detailed than the standard, let's say, monthly reports of the treasuries based on cash data. This mid-year review is almost as detailed as a final accounts. Maybe one of the problems is that moreover, there are more fiscal councils or other independent fiscal institutions in these countries who could help the parliaments to interpret or assess the mid-year situation. But maybe one of the problems is that many of these independent fiscal institutions simply don't produce their own numbers, either on macro or on fiscal data. So basically, many of them only give that, their views in a qualitative sense, so that what the government is saying is sort of okay, sorry, to be colloquial. Now, this, if it's not in the mandate of the independent fiscal institution to give its opinion on the mid-year review, then of course the Parliament does not have enough munition, let's say, to challenge it, what the government produces. Just beside that, I have to make clear that over this period of the COVID and the war, etc., the fiscal transparency measured by another part of this survey did not decline. It did not get better either, but it did not decline. Now, already the two previous speakers mentioned this change of the system in fiscal surveillance in Europe. So there was this old system, let's say, until last year. The old system consisted, of course, of the 60% and 3% rules, but there was one cornerstone of this story, namely the cyclically adjusted fiscal balance that had to converge to a so-called medium-term target, which was a country-specific medium-term target number. And it was an everlasting question how to calculate the current stance of the business cycle in the countries. There was this infamous output gap working group even in the European Union, and it was a standard debate. Let me give you an example how complicated this was. Now, I had to get back in time before the COVID. I calculated from the perspective of 2016, let's put ourselves in the shoes in 2016, what the convergence and stability programs of the EU member states said about what they expect about private investment, which is not in the decision of the governments. This is an assumption of the convergence and stability programs, but it's a crucial assumption, of course. And so I calculated what they said about 2019, how much would be the private investment compared to 2015 in real terms. And then I looked at the fact data, what actually happened. Everybody who is above the line experienced a faster growth in private investment. Only two countries Lithuania and Luxembourg had less private investment in 2019 than they hoped for in 2016 convergence program. Sorry, Ireland would be somewhere on the second floor in this chart. That's why I did not speak to it. Now, the question is, what did this have an effect on the convergence programs and stability programs published in 2019? So it was clear that over the previous 4 years, the economy performed much better than they hoped for. Still, in the next chart, we can see that everybody said that, okay, our cyclical position is somewhere, the output gap is somewhere between 0 and 2%. You know, it's a riskless statement. There was hardly anybody who said that we are heading for a slowdown. Of course, it's not fair to say, yes, this slowdown came because the COVID hit in, that nobody could foresee the COVID, so we cannot make the counterfactual experiment, but it's telling that 15 to 19 was one of the best periods in the last 30 years, probably, and still nobody was thinking of something that negative could happen. Now, there is a new system now, which of course has the 3% and 60% rules preserved, but now there is another, let me call it a tricky point of the new system from an economic analysis point of view, namely that there is this grace period, let me call it, that over the medium term, the deficit or the debt can even grow for many of the countries if they can prove that after that grace period, the debt will get on a downward sloping slide or path. And this is a key assumption because, of course, forecasting a bright, far future is much more easy or much easier than to implement those measures that will lead to that. There is a consequence of this change in the regulation, in my view, because for this, one has to clearly distinguish between the baseline scenarios and the effect of policy measures. The baseline scenarios have to be calculated with the assumption of no policy change, and then each measure has to be assessed in terms of fiscal impact, not just once at the beginning, but during the execution, and that's why I started my presentation with the problem of assessing or monitoring the fiscal policy during execution, because now the execution of the promised measures will be even more crucial to maintain the sustainability of the system. And of course, this requires a lot of quantitative analysis for which independent fiscal institutions are already set up in many or most of the countries, but many of them are probably under-resourced to perform on this. Of course, it's not enough if the independent fiscal institutions produce their analysis if there is nobody who actually uses them to hold the governments accountable, national governments accountable for what they promised in terms of measures that would then lead to the bright future of declining debt and deficit. Thank you very much.
Super. I'd like to thank once again Mr. Balázs Romhányi, the director of the Fiscal Responsibility Institute, for his presentation. And in fact, once again, I'd like to thank both keynote speakers for their thought-provoking presentations. And it seems that they have indeed been thought-provoking presentations, because I see quite a big interest on your behalf to speak. From the floor, the final number is 34. We have 34 requests from the floor to speak, and I now close this list of requests. Because of this quite big interest, I must emphasize that speaking time is quite limited to 1.5 minutes. to be able to consider that we need to finish this section at 11. So once again, it's a 1.5 minute that we can allow for these 34 speakers from the floor. So may I kindly, but forcefully, please ask you to respect this time limitation. When your time is up, you will know because I will use this all-powerful bell on my desk. This was my dream as a child, so I can use this bell. And after this, your microphones, after this in a few seconds, your microphones, unfortunately, will be automatically switched off. The participants are asked to make their interventions from their seat by just standing up and by using the small clip microphones that you see in the drawers. The microphone will only work from your allocated seat, so I kindly ask you to please make your intervention from there, and please do not move around the room. There is no need to press any buttons, since the microphones will activate automatically along the order of speakers, which you can see on the screen. So the method of the drawing up the list of contributions is identical to what was yesterday. We followed this established practice that the first speakers to receive the floor are members of the presidential troika. After that, the heads of delegations will be given the floor first, based on the order of their registration, and then all other participants in the order that they registered. So I will return the floor to our keynote speakers only before the end, if they're interested, for a few minutes before the closing of the session, to allow them, if they express an interest, to react and reflect on what has been said. So at this point, once again, the list of speakers are now closed. So the first person to speak, I now give the floor to the first speaker of this on our list, Mr. Pawlak, Waldemar Pawlak from Poland. The floor is yours for 1.5 minutes.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, let me share some key ideas based on my experience as a Minister of Economy during Poland's EU presidency in 2011. When we work on making regulation better, when we implement the better regulation strategy. These points are critical today as we face global challenges. First, reduce regulatory burden. The EU has too many rules. This will we should change from one in, one out to one in, two out. This will help business focus on growth instead of spending time on paperwork. Second, high quality impact assessment. Pure check, this is still important today. Third, direct regulation, not directives. Technical rules, technical regulation should be made directly by EU Council and Parliament, not through directives. Directives are often applied differently in each country, creating confusion, fragmentarization. That's technical Tower of Babel. Clear, direct rules would help the EU compete better with the US and China. 4, coordination between EU institutions. The EU main institution, Commission, Council, Parliament, and EESC must work closely together. 5, Poland deregulatory action. In conclusion, to stay competitive, the EU must reduce unnecessary regulation, improve effective impact assessment, and adopt uniform technical rules across member states, across EU. This will help European business compete in the global market. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. I now turn to Mr. Thomas Geisel, I mispronounce it, from the European Parliament. Floor is yours. We can't hear you. You should have microphone. You might have, you should be speaking from your, yeah, you might have the wrong microphone on from the other chair. You should have the one from your seat. Thomas, there's a microphone then there. Then just use that.
Well, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, to be honest, I was not aware that I was on the speakers list, but I do very much appreciate to have the opportunity to join this very important conference and to thank the organizers that we have the opportunity here to discuss how we can limit public debt and public deficits. I think what is really important at this point of time, I believe that Europe is to some extent at the crossroads. We're losing competitiveness. Our infrastructure is in many countries in a miserable situation, and therefore I think what is very important that we allow for public investments, because public investments are the core for future prosperity and for competitiveness in the future. Therefore, we need to strike a very fine balance between fiscal responsibility and still providing for opportunities for growth in the future. That is, I believe, very important. We have discussions, as you may be aware, also in Germany about what is called the Schuldenbremse. The Schuldenbremse cannot stop or cannot hinder public investments, because that would be very much put us at a disadvantage when it comes to future growth. So this is something that I believe is very important, and I thank also the two presenters of today, because my impression was they are very aware of this dilemma, of this challenge that we're all facing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is from Austria, Andreas Minich. The floor is yours.
Danke, Herr Vorsitzender, geschätzte Kollegen hier im Parlament. Ich darf mich auch beim Gastgeberland auf das Herzlichste bedanken für die tolle Organisation, für das Hosting hier, für die Möglichkeit, diese Konferenz zu halten. Europa steht vor großen Herausforderungen. Es ist insgesamt ein schwieriges Umfeld von globaler Seite. Es ist aber ganz besonders wichtig, dass wir jetzt wieder den Weg zu mehr Sparsamkeit und Haushaltsdisziplin und einer ordentlichen Verschuldungspolitik einschlagen. Wir sind selbst noch den nationalen Finanzplan schuldig, weil wir gerade eine besondere Situation mit der Nationalratswahl in Österreich haben. Aber ich glaube, es ist ganz besonders wichtig, jetzt für Europa die richtigen Entscheidungen zu treffen, in die richtigen Bereiche zu investieren, so wie es meine Vorredner bereits gesagt haben. Infrastruktur, ganz besonders wichtig, aber auch die Schlüsselbereiche, Energie und auch industriepolitisch hier die richtigen Maßnahmen zu setzen, dass wir hier im internationalen Umfeld gegen Asien und auch gegen die USA weiterhin wettbewerbsfähig bestehen können und hier auch eine gewisse Resilienz und Souveränität für Europa gewinnen können. Deswegen müssen wir ganz stark in Bildung investieren, in Hochtechnologie, in Halbleiter, in Batterien, erneuerbare Bereiche und natürlich auch in Biotechnologien. Und in diesem Sinne hoffe ich, dass wir hier eine gute Zusammenarbeit finden und den Weg einer vernünftigen Haushaltspolitik führen. Danke.
Thank you, and thank you for being so punctual. Next speaker from Poland, Izabela Bodnar. The floor is yours.
Distinguished Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, as far as all European Union member states have been obliged to develop a medium-term budgetary and structural plan this year, Poland plans to submit it by 15 October. Since the deadline of 15 October is already very close, Poland is conducting intensive work on preparation the first such a plan. At the moment, the plan does not assume applying for an extension of the stabilization period. The plan will be based on activities related to development of green energy, increasing participation in labor market, improving the state of water resources management. The plan will be divided into two parts, budgetary and structural. The budget plan of the plan is to include, among other things, a net expenditure path, macroeconomical assumptions, and actions that will keep the public deficit below 3% of GDP. Our deficit now is exceeded. In fact, this is mainly due to significant defense spendings and post-COVID spendings. The second part of the plan will cover structural issues, reforms and investments that will optimally respond to EU Council recommendation or fit into the implementation of common European Union priorities. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Next speaker from Romania, Gabriela Cretu. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, unfortunately, the current reform brings a few positive minor changes, but it is based on the same misleading diagnosis. Important realities are not considered. The member states' growth potential, it is different, and the necessity of credit as well. The member states are not equal on the capital and banking markets. Some are creditor countries, others debitors. How difficult it is to fill the gap, our Greek colleagues could tell us. The issue of German trade surplus never had been considered. It is diminishing now, but unfortunately, because of the crisis and the sanctions the Union inflicted on itself, and Germany, it is the engine of the economy. The lesson of the huge amount of money spent by the governments during the epidemic hasn't been learned. All characteristics of the governance framework are still in place. The arbitrary Maastricht criteria we are afraid to change because the necessity of changing treaties. The Eurozone with the rules which ask the member states to solve its bad design at the national levels without having capacity. So economic coordination, it hasn't been by now an effective tool for building the Union. There are opposite structural interests between member states and missing capacity, not only weak political will of implementation. The country recommendations seem to have only one goal, preserving the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You mentioned colleagues from Greece, and now, perfect timing, the next speaker is from the Hellenic Republic, Mr. Teodoris Tavaris.
Thank you, Chair. I will offer some comments on the new fiscal rules from a point of disinterest. My country is not in the 8 countries on an EDP procedure, and if anything, it's a star performer, both in terms of growth and in terms of fiscal discipline. We have 2.5% of primary surplus, less than 1% of overall surplus, and the new rules would force us to lower our debt by 1%. In fact, we have lowered it by 45 percentage points in the last 4 years. The new plan that we will immediately submit envisages 20 percentage points of less debt in 2 years. And in my capacity as a former Deputy Minister of Economy and Finance, I can tell you we will overshoot that target. So the new EU fiscal rules are without any doubt better tailored to each country's situation, more flexible and much more investment friendly, marking an EU a fresh start and a return to fiscal responsibility. We have stronger rules to protect our government's capability to invest. All national expenditure on the co-financing of EU-funded programs will be excluded from a government expenditure calculation. This is a positive. At the same time, the new framework provides appropriate room for counter-cyclical policies, something that we could not implement during our crisis years. The new rules allow for more breathing space, giving it needed extra years. We have to look at the implementation of those rules. There are issues that we will have to solve, but we need, first of all, to implement them correctly in the first few years and take that experience and change those rules. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker coming from Cyprus, Madam Erotokritou. Christiane Erotokritou, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, a core strength of the reformed framework is its focus on risk-based surveillance, tailoring fiscal goals to the circumstances of each EU member state. This approach ensures sustainable fiscal paths, allowing debt reduction without undermining essential public investment. Within the new economic governance framework, Cyprus is steadily on the path of a significant public debt reduction and sustains healthy budget surpluses. We do, however, have a large current account deficit due to robust domestic demand and repatriation of profits. It is imperative, therefore, for Cyprus to fully and timely implement the RRP, and it is crucial for our over-reliance on oil to diminish, swiftly implementing reforms and furthering investments in state-owned enterprises for the green transition, in education, as specified in the CSR. Balancing the need for substantial public and private investments with the sustainability of public finances remaining a significant challenge within the framework, especially amid the green transition. Stricter fiscal rules could lead to cuts in public spending, potentially undermining the social and climate objectives that are crucial for my country, Cyprus. Therefore, it is essential that fiscal policies continue to support and, in essence, accelerate investments in climate adaptation and mitigation, and that would help our economy to also be in a better competitive position. From our point of view, the key challenge is striking the right balance within the new framework between fiscal discipline and sustainable growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next speaker from Portugal, Mr. Claudino, Marco Claudino. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, distinguished colleagues, I would like to start by stating the obvious. This conference brings together representatives from different member states and from different political parties. And saying this, one can also say that certainly each of us holds distinct perspectives regarding the paths to tackle the several challenges that lie ahead. Challenges that the European Union globally and each member state individually must face with courage and tenacity in order to lead the future and to give the new generations at least the same conditions that previous generations had. The new economic governance framework is a result of a political agreement involving the European Commission, Parliament and Council, and demonstrate that common economic and financial objectives as debt and deficit reductions, and also the pursuit of sustainable and inclusive economic growth should prevail over the differences that we might have on each topic and are not in the opposite to each other. After this new regulation entered into force, Mr. Draghi presented an important report that addresses relevant issues concerning Europe's competitiveness and growth. To compete globally, the European Union must focus on innovation, on wealth creation, and on simplification. It's in our hands, and it's our responsibility to be united in the pursuit of these common goals and to foster the mechanism needed to guarantee a more resilient and dynamic economy in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. Next speaker from France, Mr. Reinhard Claude, the floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, la nouvelle gouvernance votée vise à corriger les travers des précédentes règles du pacte de stabilité et de croissance. Premièrement, ce nouveau cadre doit favoriser une plus grande implication nationale. J'approuve notamment que les objectifs prévus pour chacun des États soient désormais fonction de la situation de leurs finances publiques. Deuxièmement, notre gouvernance économique commune doit être le levier d'une croissance inclusive. Elle doit permettre de préserver l'investissement des éventuels efforts de redressement des comptes publics et d'accroître les dépenses favorables à la transition écologique. Ces dépenses d'avenir sont indispensables, alors que la réalisation de nos objectifs de transition impliquera des efforts financiers conséquents. Si l'on veut assurer cette croissance future et faire face au risque de déclassement de l'Europe dans son ensemble, utiliser le levier de la dette européenne n'est pas un gros mot. Pour les jeunes générations, une économie compétitive est au moins aussi important que d'avoir des comptes publics tenus. Il nous faut donc être vigilants pour éviter que les règles budgétaires européennes ne retombent dans leurs anciens travers. Ainsi, l'insertion de clauses de sauvegarde va dans le sens d'un durcissement des nouvelles règles et il faudra veiller à ce que ce critère ne vienne pas renverser l'équilibre entre soutien à l'investissement et soutenabilité de la dette. La nécessité de retrouver des finances publiques saines est indiscutable, c'est un Français qui vous le dit. Cependant, notre gouvernance économique commune ne doit pas être un obstacle au retour d'une croissance durable et à nos efforts pour répondre aux grandes transitions, défis majeurs des prochaines années. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Thank you. Next speaker from Kosovo, Armen Muja, or Muja. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Please.
Well, thank you very much, Honourable Chairman.
We can't hear you. You have we cannot hear you. Armand, we cannot hear you. Please, your microphone doesn't seem to be working. You should clip your microphone on.
This will work.
Yeah, one is enough. Okay, now it's fine, and your time is starting now.
Thank you. Honourable Chairman, Honourable MP, I'm coming from Kosovo. It's my first opportunity here, and I'm very glad. Thank you very much for your invitation. regarding this topic, we are at the periphery of the periphery, and as a student, I remember back then when Eastern European countries like Hungary and the rest were moving fast towards European Union, and the perspective of better lives, better standards of living also served as the backbone of the European policy. And it has definitely produced results. And I'm here to require the same commitment towards Western Balkans and Kosovo. Europe has that power. European political and economic model still is a beacon of hope for Western Balkans. The same is for European economy. Our economy has been growing. We have had 6% growth in the past 3 years. Our focus has been to invest in green energy. But as we move towards green energy, I have to remind you that we also need rare earths to support, minerals to support that green energy. We have also been implementing a new paradigm in economic policy, public investments and jobs, and inclusive growth for all, including men and women and young people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you as well. Next speaker from Luxembourg, Sven Clement.
Distinguished colleagues, as a representative of Luxembourg, I welcome the reform on the economic governance framework. While it might seem that little changes for Luxembourg, the new rules introduce complexity that demands our attention. The new framework, with its emphasis on medium-term fiscal stability and structural plans and risk-based monitoring, introduces a level of complexity that we must not underestimate. While the previous rules were often criticized for being overly rigid, they were very easily understandable. Now we find ourselves in a situation where the rule book has been rewritten in a way that demands more nuanced interpretation. This reform brings increased responsibility for national parliaments. We must intensify our scrutiny to avoid the trap of reduced vigilance. The new flexibility is not an invitation to relax, but a call for more diligent examination of our fiscal strategies. We must balance fiscal prudence with necessary strategic investments, particularly in common defense and strategic autonomy. However, let's be clear, we cannot allow deficits to be disguised as investments. True investments strengthen our children's futures. Irresponsible debts weaken it. To conclude, let's approach this reform with optimism, heightened scrutiny, heightened responsibility. We must navigate these complexities, invest wisely, and maintain fiscal discipline. Our shared European future depends on it and on us to strike that delicate balance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next speaker coming from us from Cyprus, Madam Orfanidou, Savoia Orfanidou, the floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, the new economic governance framework of the European Union represents a positive development in the management of member states' public finances. One of the most significant innovations is the adoption of a substantially differentiated approach for each member state, fully taking into account the specific conditions and challenges faced by each member state. Actually, Cyprus could see the need of the adoption of even stricter and more ambitious fiscal rules that could have ensured effective reduction of public debt. The crucial danger of age population is, of all European countries should not be underestimated. Nevertheless, we agreed to the new rules of the new economic governance framework with the precondition that this should be strictly implemented by all member states in the following years through systemic and thorough control. The framework is also trying to achieve a balance between the need for sustainable public finances and the need for significant investments and reforms that will facilitate the green and digital transition. Cyprus, in the post-pandemic era, is actually operating with a fiscal surplus close to 3% without negatively affecting the country's development needs. As long as Cyprus maintains its current fiscal policy with the high primary surpluses, it will be able to fully comply with the new framework. Despite the inevitable challenges, all member states must carefully and decisively seize the opportunity to enhance its economic and social prosperity and ensure a better future for all its citizens.
Next speaker coming from us from Serbia, Mr. Žarko Rištic. The floor is yours. I don't see the speaker. He doesn't seem to be here in the room. Okay, then we're going to continue. From Germany, Ingeborg Grable. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Ja, Gressle, Herr Vorsitzender, alles gut. Wir werden den Stabilitäts- und Wachstumspakt natürlich als nationale Parlamente mit Glaubwürdigkeit hinterlegen müssen. Und zu dieser Glaubwürdigkeit gehört zwingend die Transparenz dieser Budgets und natürlich auch eine glaubwürdige nationale Haushaltskontrolle. Sonst werden wir die Geschichte nicht mit Leben füllen können. Nur zusammen sind wir als EU stark, aber das gehört dazu, dass jeder Einzelne seine Arbeit macht. Dazu möchte ich uns jetzt alle mal aufrufen und natürlich ermöglicht die Schuldenbremse auch Investitionen. Das ist also nicht richtig, dass die Eindämmung der Schulden keine Investitionen erlaubt, wie es ein Vorredner gesagt hat. Ich möchte die ungarische Ratspräsidentschaft fragen, Herr Staatssekretär, was Sie denn tun werden, um die Kontrolle des Stabilitäts- und Wachstumspakts voranzubringen. Und wenn wir, vielen Dank, Herr Rombani, den Open Budget so mal betrachten, dann fällt mir schon auf, dass Ungarn eben bei der Frage der Transparenz des Haushalts an letzter Stelle steht und bei der Frage der Haushaltskontrolle auch. Also wir haben Haushaltskontrolle 11 von 100 und in der Transparenz 22 von 100. Da sind Sie in sehr schlechter Gesellschaft mit Diktaturen wie China. Also ich glaube, dass es auch politisch unsere Aufgabe ist, dafür zu sorgen, dass es Transparenz und eine wirkliche parlamentarische Mitwirkungsmöglichkeit gibt. Weil wenn wir das nicht tun, werden wir alle darunter leiden können und werden wir alle zusammen die Konsequenzen tragen können. Das ist kein Anschlag auf Ungarn, sondern es ist der Versuch, zusammen einfach besser zu werden, weil ohne euch werden wir es auch nicht schaffen. Dankeschön.
Thank you for that. I've heard direct questions to the Hungarian presidency. Both keynote speakers will have a brief time at the end of the session to respond if they wish to. Now I turn to the European Parliament speaker, Madam Enikő Győri. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Honourable colleagues, no one disputes that it was high time to reform the economic governance rules because its balance was rather mixed. Key economic figures were mostly improving after the 2008 crisis, but growth has been very sluggish since then. Moreover, since the outbreak of COVID plus the war, this aggravating situation was going on. As a consequence, we have newer challenges. We used to have, and we still have, skyrocketing energy prices, exaggerated green ambitions, and we suffer its consequences, unfriendly business environment, high inflation, and multiplying administrative burden. And for this, we face a very difficult competitiveness situation, hindering growth. So the most important is to find the proper balance between solid fiscal policies and growth in this challenging environment. Don't forget, even the chair of the European Fiscal Board said last week in a report that it's a very difficult start for the new rules. The Commission launched 7 EDP, excessive deficit procedures against countries, and I'm a bit worried about equal treatment, as even the EFB says that another country should have been taken into EDP, and it has not been done. So when we start the implementation of the new rules, we have to be sure that Commission acts in an impartial way and an appropriate manner. So that's, I think, the most important message which you have, because we have more tailor-made solutions, but the Commission has to respect that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. Next speaker from Portugal, Antonio Pinto Pereira. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Chair, dear members. With Europe rapidly disindustrializing and increasingly lagging behind technologically, left behind by innovation behemoths like the United States and China, few challenges could be more daunting or crucial than revitalizing European competitiveness across the board. It is fortunate to notice the exceptional work the Hungarian presidency has done in this matter. The Hungarian presidency slogan is "Make Europe Great Again," an idea that we can surely all get behind. We must make Europe great at industrial automation. Our common survival as economic center, and indeed as a relevant political player, depend on it. Progress in the area is of paramount importance, not merely for the sake of boosting labor productivity and growth, but in order to answer the demographic and migratory challenges we all face. And yet, our performance in the field couldn't be more disappointing. When it comes to installing new industrial robots, the only European country in the global top 6 is Germany, at 28,000 industrial robots. Japan managed almost 15. China, the world's top performer, installed almost 300,000, over half the world's new industrial robots. Automation is the great economic race of our time, and Europe is losing it. We should be aiming at putting Europe at the heart of the automation revolution. Instead, we are falling further and further into the periphery of this history-defining phenomenon. What, in our view, can the EU, as well as national governments, do to best promote the automation of European industry? I thank you most kindly for your insights.
Thank you so much. As well, I see already the next speaker standing from Northern Macedonia, Mr. Bojan Stoyanovski. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the chance to speaking to the fellow MPs. The past crisis faced by European economies reinforced the need for a substantial transformation of national economics and better management of public finances. The Republic of Macedonia, which is a candidate country for European membership, is also starting to transform its economy by placing special emphasis on the development of the digital and green economy. In order to accomplish this, it is necessary to ensure sufficient fiscal space in the state's budget by cutting unproductive expenses. In addition, the new law of budget, which will be fully applied from 1st January 2025, introduces fiscal rules for the first time. The general government deficit for the corresponding year must not exceed the level of 3% of the GDP. The total general government debt may not exceed the level of 60% of the nominal GDP, and the guaranteed public debt may not exceed 15% of the nominal GDP. If the general government debt is higher than 60%, the government shall draft and adopt a strategy with specific measures and activities that will lead to a reduction of the debt below this level within a maximum period of 5 years. Also, the Parliament here has a strategic role by adopting these new amendments of the budget and by making them possible by voting to the committees and to the plenary sessions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. And thank you for keeping the time so precisely. Next speaker is all set from Italy, Madame Lavinia Menuni. The floor is yours.
First of all, thank you for the lovely organization of the Hungarian Assembly in this beautiful city. L'Italia ha partecipato in maniera significativa al negoziato sulla governance economica europea e anche se abbiamo posto grande attenzione al tema della crescita, stiamo portando avanti il nostro lavoro attenti alla stabilità. La prossima settimana il Parlamento italiano andrà ad approvare il piano strutturale di bilancio, ma vorrei però porre l'attenzione sul tema della bellissima riunione di ieri sulla competitività, durante la quale è emerso che la nostra area economica industriale sta vivendo indubbiamente una fase di grande crisi. E allora credo interessante leggere velocemente il Radical Change is what is needed di Draghi, dove egli ribadisce che abbiamo perseguito una strategia di mirare ad abbassare il costo del lavoro relativo ai partners, combinando così una politica fiscale prociclica, ma purtroppo nel mercato unico abbiamo anche minato il nostro sistema sociale. E allora noi avevamo chiesto durante questo importante negoziato di scomputare dal tetto della spesa netta gli investimenti e allora io vorrei proporre una suggestione a questo autorevole consesso. Visto il tasso di natalità che purtroppo stiamo attraversando tutti come grande crisi, non sarebbe importante tagliare da quella tetto della spesa, scomputare dallo stesso anche quelli che saranno gli interventi per incentivare la nostra demografia? La storia ci insegna che le zone dove vi è un basso tasso di natalità non crescono e dobbiamo lavorare insieme per questo. Grazie.
Thank you so much. Next speaker from Germany, Madame Bettina Hagedorn. The floor is yours.
Liebe Kolleginnen, liebe Kollegen, ich freue mich, dass ich heute hier sein darf in diesem großartigen Gebäude. Und ich möchte das, was ich jetzt sage, in erster Linie als Europäerin sagen, die wir ja alle sind und nicht als Deutsche. Ich möchte uns alle daran erinnern, dass die Stabilität in Europa, die hier Thema ist, ja 2008, 2009 auf eine große Probe gestellt wurde in der Finanz- und Wirtschaftskrise und dass wir letzten Endes gemeinsam unsere Lehren daraus gezogen haben, was immer auch enorme Kompromisse erforderlich gemacht hat. Aber wir haben es geschafft und das ist der Kern der Demokratie in Europa. Und 2020, als die Corona-Pandemie war, hatten wir gemeinsam die Kraft, als wir die EU-Ratspräsidentschaft hatten, ein 750 Milliarden Euro Paket auf den Weg zu bringen, Der Staatssekretär hat vorhin über die Beschäftigungsstabilität in dieser Zeit und ihren Wert in Europa gesprochen. Und ja, das war das Programm SURE mit 100 Milliarden Euro, was wir gemeinsam auf den Weg gebracht haben. Damit haben wir den Beweis angetreten, dass Europa große Stabilität hat und Solidarität. Und darum möchte ich hier neben dem Thema Wirtschaft, das hier alle ansprechen und das so wichtig ist, auch darüber ein Wort verlieren, dass die Solidarität seit 2022 noch eine andere Dimension für uns Europäer hat. Und diese Dimension ist der Angriff von autokratischen Staaten auf unsere Demokratie in Europa, die wir nur gemeinsam bekämpfen können. Und das wird enorm viel Geld in Anspruch nehmen. Und darauf bitte ich uns alle, uns zu konzentrieren. Vielen Dank.
Thank you so much for this. Next speaker from Serbia, Nikola Radosavljevic. The floor is yours. Mr. Nikola Radosavljevic, okay. Next speaker from Portugal then, Hugo Carneiro. The floor is yours from Portugal, and I see you, the floor is yours.
Yes. Honorable Chairman, dear colleagues, as we look to the future of the European Union, one question stands out. How can we ensure that economic governance stabilizes our finances, but also drives growth and strengthens our societies? Most of us agree that member states must respect commitments on public finance and debt sustainability. However, we have also recognized the need to balance this with other vital instruments like public investment, which drive growth and development. The recent steps taken by the European Union allow each country to establish its own corrective path without sacrificing our future. Portugal learned this lesson the hard way. A few years ago, we were on the verge of bankruptcy. Families faced uncertainty, business struggled, and our banking sector was in crisis. The harsh measures imposed by the Troika severely restrict the state's financial flexibility and had long-lasting impacts. We learned that the European Union's future economic governance must be based on flexibility, rules that adapt to each country's specific conditions and allow time for gradual adjustments and financial targets when financial targets aren't met. This is crucial for maintaining stability without stifling growth. Let me share what we are doing in Portugal today, investing in public service and reducing taxes to our citizens. As we stand, these policies are fully compatible with the new European Union economic governance framework. We are restoring public trust in our political institutions.
I'm sorry for this. There's an automatic system that we had to cut you off, but thank you for your kind thoughts. Next speaker from Germany, Bernhard Dahlgrupp. The floor is yours, sir. We have difficult. The microphone doesn't seem to be working. Are you in your correct seat? So if you can try now. Speak now. Speak. Okay, it's fine.
Bin ich zu hören? Jetzt vielleicht?
Ja. It's fine.
Ja, geht es so? Okay.
Yes.
Gut. Also noch einmal, Herr Vorsitzender, meine lieben Kolleginnen und Kollegen, gestern ausgenommen war ich zum letzten Mal vor 45 Jahren in diesem Parlament, als ich als Stipendiat der Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung hier in der Bibliothek arbeiten konnte. Und damals lebten wir in einer Zeit sozusagen im Schatten des Eisernen Vorhangs. Und für Ungarn und für viele andere Länder war Europa die Hoffnung. Europa war die Perspektive. Und Europa war etwas mit solidarischer Kraft. Darauf hat die Kollegin Hagedorn eben hingewiesen. Und deswegen sage ich mal, mit Kleinstaaterei und Nationalismus kommen wir auch in der Frage der finanz- und wirtschaftspolitischen Steuerung nicht weiter. Zweitens, Herr Weyer hat den Wachstumspakt dargestellt. Und in der Tat gibt es eine Debatte in Deutschland, Thomas Geisel weiß das, über Schuldenbremse und beispielsweise der Frage, wie es denn mit den Investitionen ist. Der bundesdeutsche Haushalt hat 488 Milliarden und eine Investitionsquote zum gegenwärtigen Zeitpunkt von 80 Milliarden. Aber trotzdem ist richtig, wir müssten eigentlich mehr investieren. Und weil wir mehr investieren müssen, deswegen heißt es, die Zukunftschancen der zukünftigen Generation sozusagen zu stabilisieren. Das ist ein wichtiger Gesichtspunkt. Deswegen akzeptieren wir auch und unterstützen auch den Rahmen der wirtschaftspolitischen Steuerung, weil er Schuldentragfähigkeit und Wachstum sozusagen auf Zeit einbringt, aber die auch erfordert, dass die Zusagen eingehalten werden. Das ist ein wichtiger Gesichtspunkt, auf den man sich noch zusätzlich wird verständigen müssen. Herzlichen Dank. Köszönöm.
Thank you so much, and then welcome back to the building. The next speaker is from Italy, Michele Schiano di Visconti. The floor is yours. Whom I don't see.
È un grandissimo onore per me parlare qui. Racchiudo il tutto in pochi minuti perché avere 1 minuto e mezzo è un po' riduttivo per ognuno di noi che ci possa consentire di esporre quanto avremmo voluto fare. Bene, io dico bene i criteri di stabilità, di rigore, di disciplina, però io suggerirei con forza di tenere presente le peculiarità di quelle che sono le esigenze di ogni Stato membro dell'Europa. Faccio un esempio, quindi tenere fuori dal patto di stabilità per quanto riguarda appunto le peculiarità per ogni Stato alcune esigenze particolari. Quindi tenendo maggiormente, quindi rispettando il rigore ma tenendo un quadro di flessibilità consentendo ai vari Stati membri di tenere fuori alcune. Faccio un esempio per l'Italia: la sanità, il dissesto idrogeologico, ma così potrebbe capitare per altri Stati membri. Quindi vengo veramente alla conclusione dicendo che sicuramente noi ci stiamo attenendo, quindi come diceva prima la collega Mennuni, alla prossima legge di stabilità, tenendo appunto ben presente quanto è stato recepito dalla riforma della governance economica, però sicuramente noi pensiamo e siamo convinti che avere un momento di flessibilità e consentire ai vari Stati membri di mettere in atto anche le proprie peculiarità sarebbe un qualcosa di importante che farebbe ancora di più crescere l'Europa. Grazie.
Thank you so much for your thoughts. Next speaker from Kosovo, Jeta Statovci.
Greetings to everyone, dear honorable, dear parliamentarians. A pleasure to be here and to talk more on this important topic. During the recent years in Kosovo, we have made significant progress in terms of economic development and in regarding to stimulating welfare among citizens. There has been more focus on increasing the economy, increasing budget revenues, stimulating employment among youth and women, and also assisting in the green transition of energy, especially moving from coal to green. The recent data from different stakeholders and different actors shows that there has been an increase of GDP up to 6.2% over the 3 years, and has been increase of budget revenues, and this happening while we were lowering the public debt. Currently, Kosovo stands at a public debt of 17.2%, which makes it one of the countries with the lowest public debt in Europe. This has been going in hand with stimulating employment. There has been measures in helping employment among students and linking it to the labor market. The measure introduced around 10,000 students in the labor market, and this helping especially youth and women. Women representation among boards of public institutions has increased up to 45%, and there has been also economic measures in helping the transition towards green energy. Especially during energy crisis, it was important that we reduce coal energy consumption and also find alternatives for alternative energy sources. And this has resulted in a decrease of energy consumption up to 15%. All these in stimulating rule of law and making an environment for health economic development. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your thoughts. Next speaker from Spain, Jose Maria Sanchez. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bueno, estamos debatiendo algo que es verdaderamente muy importante y no me voy a referir a ningún Estado de la Unión Europea en particular, ni siquiera a España. Me refiero a la situación general de Europa y las políticas económicas de los gobiernos de los Estados miembros. Hemos tenido un programa, el de los fondos Next Generation EU, que era esencialmente un programa de endeudamiento, se quiera ver como se quiera, ya sea por el incremento del límite de los recursos llamados propios de la Unión Europea, ya sea por la segunda parte que era de endeudamiento de la Unión Europea en los mercados. Por lo tanto, no hay ninguna novedad, salvo que esto respondió a una situación extraordinaria como fue la pandemia. No hay ninguna novedad porque es una política genuinamente keynesiana en un momento de crisis con la que se trató de estimular es cierto, no la demanda sino la oferta, pero desde luego la ejecución de esos fondos, por lo menos en España, ha sido de estímulo de la demanda. Por lo tanto, como digo, una política keynesiana rudimentaria. Y ahora llega el señor Draghi y nos dice en ese informe sobre la competitividad que hacen falta 800.000 euros más de inversión al año en el conjunto de la Unión Europea. Es decir, un programa equivalente en su importe al de los fondos Next Generation EU anualmente. Bueno, esto ya es como incidir en una cuestión que, por lo demás, se ha demostrado por la experiencia que estas políticas keynesianas rudimentarias no contribuyen a la prosperidad ni a medio ni a largo plazo. Además, con una predilección de sectores como son la innovación, la descarbonización y la seguridad, los tres nos suscitan verdaderamente dudas serias acerca de que sean los que necesitan de más estímulo. Por lo tanto, no hay ninguna
Thank you so much, and sorry for this. There's an automatic system out of my control. Next speaker is from Portugal, Carlos Pereira. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, dear colleagues. I would like to share some data about the Portuguese economy that reflect the development of a strategy that contradicts the old recommendations that austerity measures is the best way to address issues of debt and deficit. From 2016, the Portuguese government abandoned the austerity policies that had been in place since 2011 as a means of balancing the country's public accounts. At that time, the Portuguese government started a new approach based on the following policies: return of income and public and private investment increase. These options had a low, high gross domestic product rates and also public debt decreases. This is how Portugal emerged from the debt crisis and remarkably overcame a devastating pandemic as well as inflation that negatively impacted the well-being of its citizens. Therefore, this new economic governance framework, which combines flexibility with budgetary discipline, negotiated under challenging circumstances, is aligned with the interests of Europe. This is the interest of a competitive Europe that takes into account the realities of each country. There are no one-size-fits-all solutions, and economic governance must ensure budgetary space for critical investment. We hope that Europe will not revert to the past. We have no doubt that we are facing a new challenge, but Portugal, after years of policies to promote economic growth, is now prepared and confident. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and perfect timing as well. Next speaker from Malta, Jerome Caruana Cilia, if I pronounce it correctly. I tried my best.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When addressing the Maltese Parliament, I always emphasize that Malta, together with other member states, need to comply with the budgetary discipline. This is imperative to ensure stability and growth. However, rather than adding further layers of rules and regulations that lead to less growth and we end up being less competitive, the EU needs to focus on adding elements of flexibility that are crucial. Yes, member states must comply with budgetary discipline on the basis of criteria and reference values set in the EU treaties. However, in relation to what I have just stated, what is the EU doing to reduce the excessive bureaucracy? What is the EU doing to increase its competitiveness? What is the EU doing to ensure that we attract the right investment and therefore we increase the Union's productivity levels? We need to invest more in innovation and digital transformation. We need to strengthen the single market, enhance labor mobility, and reduce regulatory barriers. We have to support small businesses and foster research collaboration, skills development, sustainable growth, and access to global markets for a resilient economy need to be prioritized. We need to ensure that in the current geopolitical instabilities and the various risks that our SMEs and businesses are facing, the EU is more proactive and dynamic in enhancing growth and not increasing red tape. To conclude, we are in a critical phase, and what we do now will certainly impact not just our generation, but certainly our future generations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for this. Next speaker from Germany, Mr. Carsten Klein. The floor is yours.
Ja, vielen Dank für die Vorträge nochmal. Zweifelsohne sind verbindliche und ambitionierte Fiskalregeln ein Grundpfeiler für unsere Wirtschafts- und Währungsunion. Und die Glaubwürdigkeit dieser Regeln hängt natürlich an der konsequenten Anwendung. Das ist bei allen großen Herausforderungen für uns im Bereich der äußeren Sicherheit, beim Thema Wirtschaftskrise, aber bei vielen anderen Themen auch natürlich entscheidend, dass wir politisch handlungsfähig bleiben, und zwar nicht nur wir, sondern auch unsere Kinder, die zukünftigen Generationen, und das gewährleisten diese Fiskalregeln. Deshalb begrüße ich, dass die Kriterien 3% und 60% auch beibehalten worden sind, aber auch, dass der präventive Arm überarbeitet worden ist, dass wir Anpassungspfade haben, die für die Mitgliedstaaten jetzt auch realistischer umzusetzen sind. Die Einführung des Netto-Primärausgleiches soll ja in erster Linie mal exogene Faktoren ausklammern, also die Verschuldung von Vorgängerregierungen und deren Zinslasten, aber auch konjunkturelle Schwankungen zum Beispiel. Das macht die Arbeit der jeweiligen aktuellen Regierung natürlich für uns alle gemeinsam besser messbar. Aber es wird auch dazu führen, dass sich die Regierungen nicht mehr hinter den Zahlen von den Vorgängerregierungen verstecken können, sondern dass sie besser greifbar sind. Und deshalb ist, glaube ich, dann unsere Aufgabe gemeinsam, die Fiskalkontrolle zu intensivieren, auszubauen und zu verstärken im Sinne der Investitionsfähigkeit unserer Länder, die nachhaltig zu erhalten ist. Und dafür sorgen die Fiskalregeln. Vielen Dank.
Thank you so much. And as they say, last but not least, for sure the last speaker from the floor, Mr. Arie Griffioen from the Netherlands.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Governance is all about maintaining a shared vision on what rules, producers and standards are required for a well-functioning collaboration. And subsequently, it comes down to collectivity upholding those shared rules, procedures and standards. Not in a one-sided or patronizing way, but in a joint effort to do what needs to be done for the EU as a whole. The reformed European budgetary rules provide an opportunity to make a fresh start with the EU economic governance. It's a clear fact that budget deficits and governance debts are far too high in too many European member states. This entails a major risk not only for those countries themselves, but for the euro area collectively. In the Netherlands, we attach great importance to prudent fiscal policies and sustainable government debts. The EU economic governance is pointless if the rules we have all agreed upon are not complied with. It's the responsibility of each country to set the priorities in their own national budgets to come to sound and sustainable public finances. And finally, we need enforcement too. Therefore, my question to the speakers is the following. What effect do you expect from the new economic governance framework in the coming years? And how can we collectively avoid the mistakes of the past? Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes the contributions from the floor. I thank you all for your contributions, and I also thank you for being so punctual in terms of time. And because of this, we're doing fine with time. We have a break at 11, but we still have a few more minutes in the session. So at this point, I'd like to give back the floor for a few minutes to our keynote speakers to react if they wish, either from the podium or from their chairs as they wish. So I'd first like to kindly invite Mr. Bonai, the State Secretary, to take the floor first to react to what has been said.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much for the interesting thoughts you had, and the interesting things you have spoken about. Many speakers have mentioned the issue of competitiveness. And many speakers have mentioned the Draghi report. Fact number one is that the European Union is losing ground compared to the US and compared to Southeast China. Let me mention a personal issue. 24 years ago, in 2000, I have worked as a trainee for the European Commission for a few months. At that time, many important documents were on economic issues, and documents in 2000, 24 years ago, again, said that the European Union is losing ground. Now we are in 2024, and again, the issue is the same. And many speakers have mentioned that in order to boost economic growth, we need investments. And there might be a contradiction with lowering state deficit and state debt. So this is first issue which was mentioned by many speakers, and I completely agree with you. It's no coincidence that there's a Draghi report in front of us. So number one issue is competitiveness. I'm very glad that some speakers, Ms. Orfanidou from Cyprus or Ms. Menuni from Italy, have mentioned the issue of demography. Fact number two is that among the member states, there's not even one member state where the fertility ratio is above 2. The factual thing is that we are dying out. European nations are dying out. Do we accept this? Do we accept this or not? So this is a second challenge. That's why during the Hungarian presidency, we think about the issue of competitiveness, and we think about the issue of demography as a kind of flagship issues. These are the things we are facing. And what can we do? In order to have higher competitiveness, in order to have growth, yes, we need investments. In order to have more and more children, we need to support the families. That also needs fiscal sources. And at the same time, then comes the issue of fiscal sustainability. And yes, there might be a contradiction between these issues. What can be the solution? What I can tell you is the practice of the Hungarian government, which was followed after 2010. What we have done was cutting tax ratios on employment, cutting tax ratios on investment. The result was the mentioned 1 million additional workforce in Hungary. Again, Hungary is a country of 10 million people. Before the COVID, in 5 years, the annual Hungarian GDP growth ratio was 4.1%, while the EU average was 2.1%, so almost double. What we have done as regards demography, we have seriously increased support to those families who decide to have children. Now, total expenditures and tax advantages to families having children is around 4% of GDP, 4% of GDP. And at the same time, as we have seen, we could keep the deficit below the 3% limitation, and together with Malta, we could decrease the debt to GDP ratio year by year. Why? Because on one hand, again, we have made serious tax cuts on employment, on investments. We have increased support to families. On the other hand, we have increased taxes related to consumption, because we, together with international organizations, with the OECD or other members, thinks that taxation on consumption doesn't harm economic growth. And we made very serious steps to widen the economy. And that's why we could reach some success. As regards demography, the Hungarian fertility ratio was around 1.2 in 2010. It went up to 1.6. It's still far below the 2.1 we need, even just to replace ourselves. But still, the increase was one of the biggest within the European Union. So these are the challenges we have to face, and these are the challenges to which we need to find the right answers. And last but not least, I've got a question on transparency. I completely agree with those points which say that transparency is needed to give information to the people on budgetary policy. What I can tell you about the Hungarian practice, that, look, we are here in the building of the Hungarian parliament. What I can tell you, looking at the chair as well, that when the budgetary proposal submitted by the government to the parliament, so when the budgetary proposal is discussed by the parliament, then there are two documents submitted parallelly with the budgetary proposal to the parliament. Two documents submitted by organs independent from the government. First one is the Court of Auditors. The second one is the document submitted by the Fiscal Council. In Hungary, the government can only vote on the budgetary proposal if the Fiscal Council, a body independent from the government, if the Fiscal Council gives the green light, and the green light is given by the Fiscal Council only if the budgetary proposal can result in debt reduction. So I think as regards transparency, the Parliament is informed not only on the proposal from the government, but is informed on the opinion of independent bodies as well. I don't know other EU member states where the Fiscal Council has this very special, unique veto right. There's a public document from the OECD, the so-called Fiscal Advocacy Index, which scrutinizes the role of fiscal councils. According to this public document, according to the opinion of the OECD, the Hungarian practice or the Hungarian Fiscal Council is ranked above many European member states. For example, is ranked clearly above Germany. Maybe we have room for maneuver, room to increase the transparency, but I hope that we can still have a transparent budget, which might result in deficit and debt reduction in the future years, parallelly with keeping the economic growth higher than the present numbers we face. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. State Secretary. Previously, I emphasized our points of agreement. Now I could emphasize many points of our disagreement in your speech, but I'm going to exert a great level of self-control. I'm acting as a chair, and in front of an international audience, I'm not going to amplify this, but just one comment. The level of the independence of these bodies that you mentioned, how should I put it, is debatable at best, in my opinion, but I'm not going to push this idea of differences. Let's try to find common grounds at this setting. I'd like to turn now to Mr. Balázs Romhányi, who is the director of the Fiscal Responsibility Institute, to again give us his feedback on what was said at this discussion. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for all the contributions to this conference. As I said, I'm not from the government, or not from a government organization. I'm not from Fiscal Council. I'm a civil society organization. But still, I think that in many of these contributions, the key point, and sorry, this is somewhat personal, this is the crucial future role of independent fiscal institutions, including fiscal councils and parliamentary budget offices. Mr. Pavlak, as far as I could understand, you mentioned on the second place of your list, high quality impact assessments. Who else could produce them? Of course, the government has to do it, but somebody has to be able to challenge them. So this is role number one for fiscal councils. Transparency is one of the key contributions of these independent fiscal institutions, because by law, if the law is good, well designed, they have to have access to all information needed. Then Mr. Clement from Luxembourg mentioned, that the future will be, there is a more, there's a bigger room for maneuvering, let's say, on the short term, but this is not no reason for profligacy. This is what has required much more stringent control and surveillance from the Parliament. Again, the independent fiscal institutions will have to play a crucial role. Now, we have already in all of these countries independent central banks, independent statistical offices, independent audit offices. In all these three cases, there are established mechanisms how to make sure that they are independent. The European Central Bank protects the central banks. The statistical offices are protected, controlled regularly by the Eurostat in Luxembourg. The audit offices also have their own organization for, let's say, peer review mechanisms. I think that independent fiscal institutions will need some sort of a mechanism to make sure that they are also independent and they produce high quality outputs for serving the Parliament in surveillance activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this, Mr. Director. In the interest of time, we are approaching the coffee break. That's the most difficult time to have a speech, so I'm not going to deliver my closing remarks. I'd just like to tell you in actually 2 or 3 short sentences the takeaways that I will be taking home from this part of the conference, which is the idea that the EU is built on an economic system of solid foundations for sure, but the challenges of a changing world do call for some reconsideration. And we must respond to these challenges in unity. And that's the word I'm going to take home from this, the word or the concept of unity, because only in this way can we ensure that our economic system remains more resilient, flexible, and sustainable in the long run. So, ladies and gentlemen, these discussions to me have highlighted once again how even though the EU faces significant challenges, it's also presented with tremendous opportunities. However, once again, we can only seize these opportunities together through cooperation. And that is, to me, that is what the essence of the EU lies precisely in this. It's a union that draws strength from its diversity, where national and EU interests are balanced and where competitive advantage is paired with solidarity. In my view, this is the beloved EU, a community that even in the most difficult of times has been able to come together and look ahead. These are my takeaways, and now with this, I'd like to conclude session 2. I wish to thank all of our keynote speakers for joining us today and for sharing their thoughts on this very important and topical issue. And dear colleagues, I thank you all for sharing your thoughts from the floor, and thank you for your active participation and attention during this agenda item. Now let's have a coffee break until 11:30, from which time you will proceed with the final session of this conference. Thank you for this, and I wish all of you to enjoy further our conference. All the best.
Tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim, tisztelt miniszter úr, kedves kollégák! Az Országgyűlés Európai Ügyek Bizottságának elnökeként magyar szívem melegével köszöntöm kedves mindnyájukat. Nagy örömömre szolgál, hogy a visszajelzések alapján konferenciánk első napját sikeresnek ítélték, beleértve a tegnap esti szabadidős programot is. Itt szeretném megköszönni Illés Boglárkának, a Külügyminisztérium államtitkárának, hogy személyes jelenlétével és pohár köszöntőjével tiszteletét tette, ahogyan Győri Enikő, európai parlamenti képviselőnknek is köszönöm a megjelenését. Most folytatjuk a gazdaságpolitikai konferenciánkat, melynek utolsó napirendi pontja a kohéziós politikával és a többéves pénzügyi kerettel foglalkozik. Külön köszöntöm körünkben Navracsics Tibort, az Európai Bizottság korábbi kulturális, oktatási, ifjúságpolitikai és sportügyi biztosát, Magyarország korábbi miniszterelnök helyettesét, aki jelenleg közigazgatásért és területfejlesztésért felelős miniszter, és akinek jelenléte jól tükrözi
napirendi pont kiemelt jelentőségét. Miniszter úr, köszönöm szépen, hogy előadóként, főelőadóként elfogadta meghívásunkat. Elisa Ferreira, az Európai Bizottság kohézióért és reformokért felelős biztosa hamarosan videó üzenetével fogja köszönteni konferenciánkat, amit ezúton is köszönök. Sajnáljuk, hogy személyes jelenlétével biztos asszony ez alkalommal nem tudott megtisztelni bennünket. A videóüzenet megtekintése előtt azonban most a technikai kérdések ismertetésével kapcsolatos kötelességemnek szeretnék eleget tenni. Szeretném tájékoztatni önöket, hogy a felszólalásokra a miniszteri expozét követően nyílik majd lehetőség. A felszólalások időkerete figyelemmel a felszólalók számára, és arra, hogy miniszter úrnak 13 órakor távoznia kell az ülésteremből, az expozé hosszának függvényében 1,5 vagy 2 perc lesz, melynek lejáratát jeleznem lesz szükséges. A felszólalás során kérem továbbra is mindenki a saját helyéről felállva beszéljen, a mikrofont használva. Kérem önöket, hogy az időkeretet legyenek kedvesek tartani. A felszólalásokra a leadott igényeknek megfelelően kerül majd sor, de a helyszínen is lehet még kérni szót a megfelelő lapok időben történő kitöltésével. Mindezek után most kérem a technikus kollégákat, hogy indítsák el Elisa Ferreira biztos asszony videó üzenetét.
Dear friends of cohesion and enthusiasts of good governance, cohesion policy plays a key role in our European project. It represents around 1/3 of the European budget, 13% of all the public investment on average across member states. But more than the funds is the principle that underpins it, that everyone, no matter who they are or where they were born, should have the same opportunities to participate and benefit from European integration. Cohesion is often taken for granted. However, it is a policy that we need to cherish, to protect, to reinforce. First, because it fosters long-term economic competitiveness. For example, the 13 countries which joined the European Union in 2004 and years following had an average income per capita of 2004 of just 52% of the total average, so about a half. 20 years later, this has now risen to 80% on average, thanks in large part to the investments of cohesion policy. These investments laid the foundation for prosperity and growth by providing or upgrading infrastructure in transport, energy, ICT, by financing training and upskilling workers, or by investing in research facilities, to give a few examples only. Cohesion policy contributes to kick-starting new economic activities, energized communities, and empowered regions to shape their destinies. This is European taxpayers' money, well invested. And this is just one example of how cohesion policy is a force for long-term competitiveness, helping regions modernize, catch up. This is one of the many arguments for reinforcing cohesion policy in the future MFF, also considering our commitment to an enlarged union. Second, cohesion policy is crucial in crisis. For example, in COVID, cohesion policy became one of the first responders of Europe. Within 4 weeks of the start of the crisis, support was already on the ground, and in the months that followed, cohesion policy mobilized 23 billion euros for emergency medical supplies, as well as working capital to keep business alive and jobs going. And this is just one example of cohesion policy responding to crises. Since then, we have mobilized support for refugees, for energy crisis, and for strategic technologies. The fast and seamless use of cohesion policy resources highlighted how important and consequential EU budget is for common union challenges, and how the size matters to our capacity to respond also to unexpected challenges. A third point, cohesion policy is also crucial to ensure that no place feels forgotten, stemming brain drain and sharp decline in vulnerable regions. For example, it is estimated that the new 2021-27 programs will create 1.3 million jobs across Europe. Because it is not enough to talk for freedom to stay. We must provide reasons to stay. So for all these reasons, long-term economic competitiveness, tackling crises, and ensuring that in reality no region is left behind, Europe needs cohesion policy, which should be adequately resourced and fit to assist regions facing a host of new internal and external challenges. But the needs are evolving, and the policy must evolve too. I was glad to hear President von der Leyen emphasizing in July at the Parliament that we need a strengthened cohesion policy. This should include a more performance-oriented delivery model, simpler and with stronger links to growth enhancing and regional relevant reforms. Second, we need a policy with more built-in flexibility to respond to new needs and unforeseen challenges while maintaining the stable long-term framework that is the strength of the policy itself. Third, we need stronger partnerships at every level. We must put regions at the center. Local partners are the secret of our success. But this enhanced role will require a greater emphasis on capacity building. We must also forge stronger partnerships with other European Union funds and programs, as well as national policies. Well, dear friends, the future will bring more challenges, from the twin transition to increasing global competition. To ensure that in reality, no place is left behind, we need a stable cohesion policy, aligned with our values, tailor-made to regional needs, where procedures are clear and simple, and where coordination and partnership with economic and social stakeholders, civil society, local authorities, well, all this works well. This will not only serve the beneficiaries, direct beneficiaries of cohesion policy, but it will also foster trust in proper execution of the European budget. So with this, I leave you and I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Biztos asszony köszöntőjét megköszönöm, de engedjék meg, hogy a kohéziós politikával kapcsolatosan elmondjam, hogy az Európai Unió egyik nagyon fontos vívmánya ez. Ugyanakkor fontosnak tartom leszögezni, hogy sokak politikai kommunikációjával ellentétben a kohéziós források nem könyöradományok, amelyekkel a gazdagabb országok támogatják a szegényebbeket, hanem az uniós szerződések alapján a tagállamokat jogosan megillető kifizetések. Minden egyes tagállam ugyanis az uniós csatlakozásával többek között megnyitotta piacait, termelési és szolgáltatási szektorát. Sajnálatos, hogy 20 évvel a csatlakozásunk után jelenleg úgy állunk, hogy a Magyarországot ebben az uniós költségvetési ciklusban megillető kohéziós források egy része felfüggesztésre került, különböző ideológiai jellegű okok miatt. A kohéziós források lévén létrejött beruházások értéket teremtenek, nem csak a helyi közösségeket, de egész Európát erősítik. Meggyőződésem, hogy ezen forrásokhoz való hozzájutás késlekedése is méltánytalan nehézségeket jelent majd azok szigorú előírások szerint történő felhasználása során. Sajnos meggyőződésem, hogy mindez már a források lehívhatóságát és felhasználhatóságát is veszélyezteti, hiszen aki valósított már meg ilyen beruházást, az pontosan tudja, hogy mennyire összetett egy-egy kohéziós projekt, milyen szigorú pályázati, számviteli, közbeszerzési, szabályozási és elszámolási feltételeknek kell megfelelni. Egyéni választókerületemben a fővárostól 40 kilométerre nyugatra fekvő Pannonia Szíve régió 35 településén a terület és településfejlesztési operatív program forrásainak felhasználásával 2014-2020-as költségvetési ciklusban összesen 87 beruházás valósult meg, 18 milliárd forint értékben, ami közel 45 millió euró. A jelen költségvetési ciklus tekintetében pedig 25 beruházás fejeződött be, vagy van folyamatban, 3,8 milliárd forint értékben, ami közel 10 millió euró. Ennek az operatív programnak a segítségével gyermeknevelést támogató infrastruktúrát lehet fejleszteni, óvodai és bölcsődei férőhelyek létesítésével, mód nyílik az egészségügyi és szociális alapinfrastruktúra fejlesztésére, önkormányzati fenntartású intézmények épületenergetikai korszerűsítésére, városrehabilitációs folyamatok elindítására, de a helyi gazdaság és a térségi turizmus fejlesztésére is, ahogyan a közutak építésére is és korszerűsítésére is sor kerülhet. A források felhasználásának szabályossága és hatékonysága tekintetében szeretném tájékoztatni önöket, hogy tudomásom szerint mindösszesen 3 esetben indult szabálytalansági eljárás a megvalósult beruházásokkal kapcsolatban, amely visszafizetési kötelezettséget egyetlen esetben sem keletkeztetett. Szeretném tájékoztatni önöket arról is, hogy hasonló területfejlesztési célok megvalósulását a magyar emberek munkájának, a magyar gazdaság teljesítményének köszönhetően az elmúlt években Magyarország kormánya közvetlen nemzeti források biztosításával is támogatni tudta, közvetlenül a magyar költségvetésből. Így a Magyar Falu Program az 5000 lakos alatti települések fejlődését és népesség megtartó erejének növelését szolgálja. Az országos óvodafejlesztési program során választókerületem 5 településén jöhetett létre új egyházi fenntartású óvoda. Az országos templom felújítási program segítségével választókerületem szinte valamennyi településén volt templomfelújítás, van olyan település, ahol több felekezet temploma is megújulhatott. A kiemelt társadalmi igények megvalósulása érdekében elindított országos úthálózatfejlesztési program A választókerületem nagyforgalmú, alsóbrendű úthálózatának szinte teljes felújításához biztosított forrást. Az aktív Magyarországért program jelentős turisztikai hálózatfejlesztést tett lehetővé, többek között a választókerületemen áthaladó Budapest-Balaton kerékpárút létrehozásával. Magyarország kormánya kiemelten támogatta Pannonia Szíve turisztikai célú fejlesztéseit, a Pannonia Szíve program forrásainak biztosításával, melynek során Martonvásár, Etyek és a Velencei-tó környékén jelentős turisztikai vonzerőt létrehozó fejlesztésekre kerülhetett sor. Ha összevetjük a terület és település fejlesztésére választókerületemben az elmúlt 15 évben elköltött forrásokat, akkor megállapítható, hogy a nemzeti forrásból megvalósult fejlesztések összértéke jelentősen meghaladja az Európai Uniós forrásból megvalósultakét. Mindezek ellenére egyértelművé kell tegyem, hogy az uniós források fontos célok megvalósulását szolgálták, és a jövőben is nélkülözhetetlenek a térségünk fejlődéseket tekintetében, ahogy Magyarország és Európa versenyképességének megőrzése miatt is. Ennyi felvezetést követően most kérem Navracsics Tibor miniszter urat, hogy tartsa meg előadását innét a pulpitusról. Miniszter úr, parancsoljon!
Tisztelt elnök úr, tisztelt képviselőtársaim! Örömömre szolgál, hogy ma itt lehetek ezen a számomra személyesen is fontos konferencián. Az előttünk álló kihívásokkal való szembenézés közös felelősségünk, és különösen fontos, hogy ezekről a kérdésekről ne csak tagállami, de minél szubszidiárisabb szinten is folytassunk eszmecserét. De vágjunk is bele, és kérem, engedjék meg, hogy beszédemet a kohéziós politika jövőjéről szóló gondolatokkal kezdjem. A kohéziós politika az Európai Unió többéves pénzügyi keretének egyik legnagyobb költségvetési tétele a közös agrárpolitika után. Ez a költségvetés körülbelül 1/3 jelenti. A 2021-2027-es időszakban a többéves pénzügyi keret teljes összegéből, ami 1074,3 milliárd euró, a kohéziós politika 330,2 milliárd eurót tesz ki. Az elmúlt időszakban számos olyan dokumentum látott napvilágot, amely a kohéziós politikával foglalkozik, illetve annak jellegzetességeit és eredményeit vizsgálva a jövőbeli alakulásával foglalkozik. Az Európai Bizottság 2022. februárjában tette közzé a 8. kohéziós jelentést, amely átfogó képet adott a kohéziós politika végrehajtásáról és annak eredményeiről. Különös tekintettel az európai régiók közötti egyenlőtlenségek alakulására, valamint iránymutatásokat is tartalmazott a kohéziós politika jövőjére vonatkozóan. Bevezette a ne árts a kohéziónak elvet, amely a kohéziós célkitűzést a többi szakpolitikai céllal szemben magasabb szintre emelte, és újfent megerősítette, hogy az Európai Unió egyik fő célkitűzésének kellene lennie. Emellett az elv alátámasztja a kohéziós politika relevanciáját, és megerősíti, hogy kiemelt szerepet kell a politikának szánni a következő többéves pénzügyi keretben is. A mi értelmezésünk szerint ez azt is jelenti, hogy egyetlen más uniós eszköz sem helyettesítheti a kohéziós politikát. Úgy véljük, hogy az egységes piac további megerősítése nem vezethet a központosítás felé való elmozduláshoz, ami a kohéziós politika által képviselt területi megközelítés rovására menne. Az idén márciusban megjelent következő 9. kohéziós jelentés bemutatta, hogyan járult hozzá a kohéziós politika az Európai Unió régiói közötti gazdasági, társadalmi és területi egyenlőtlenségek csökkentéséhez, különösen a 2021-2027-es pénzügyi időszakban. A jelentés kiemelte a zöld és digitális átállásra, a társadalmi befogadásra, valamint az innovációra fordított forrásokat és az EU régiói előtt álló jövőbeli kihívásokat, mint például a demográfiai változások és a régiók közötti fejlettségi különbségek kezelése. A kohéziós jelentésekből tanulva a Magyar Országgyűlés 2023 végén elfogadta az új területfejlesztési törvényt, amely egy új alapelvet vezetett be, a területi szempontok előtérbe helyezését a fejlesztéspolitikában. Létrehoztunk egy átfogó, szükséglet alapú fejlesztési keretrendszert, amely elősegíti a különböző régiók hosszú távú, fenntartható fejlődését. Ez a törvény biztosítja, hogy a térségi együttműködések révén a forrásokat a közös célok meghatározása mellett eredményesebben használjuk fel, ezáltal növelve a kohéziós politika hatásosságát és elősegítve a régiók fejlődését. Fejlesztési politikánk célja, hogy a helyi életminőséget javítsuk, hiszen az uniós forrásokból megvalósított fejlesztések közvetlen hatással vannak a települések népességmegtartó képességére, amely alapvető tényezője a területfejlesztési törekvéseinknek. Célunk az, hogy hosszú távú tervezésre építsük a fejlesztéseket, nem pedig egy-egy pályázati felhívásra válaszoljunk. Azok a projektek, amelyek valós igényekre alapozott komplex tervezés eredményeként születnek, hosszabb távon fenntarthatók és sikeresebbek lesznek. Éppen ezért ösztönöznünk kell az önkormányzatokat, hogy közösen fogalmazzák meg fejlesztési koncepcióikat. Ez különösen igaz a várostérségek esetében, ahol a különböző funkciók szerint közös területfejlesztésre van szükség. A tervezés azonban csak az első lépés. Ezután a kohéziós politika sikeréhez elengedhetetlen, hogy nagyobb rugalmasságot biztosítsunk a végrehajtás során is. Csökkentenünk kell a felülről lefelé irányuló megközelítéseket, és teret kell adnunk a helyi kezdeményezéseknek, hogy azok valós igényekre alapozva szabadon fejlődhessenek. A kohéziós politika alapvető elemei közé tartozik a tagállamokkal megosztott irányítás, a szubszidiaritáson alapuló végrehajtási elvek, a partnerség elve és a területi fókusz, amelyek megőrzése és további erősítése elengedhetetlen a jövőben is, mert ezek teszik lehetővé az együttműködést. A jövőbeli kohéziós politika csak akkor tud megfelelően hozzájárulni a területi különbségek kezeléséhez és a nagyobb területi érzékenységre irányuló holisztikus erőfeszítésekhez, ha megfelelő pénzügyi források állnak rendelkezésre. Ehhez elengedhetetlen, hogy a kohéziós politika stabil és elegendő finanszírozással rendelkezzen a hosszú távú célok megvalósítása érdekében, biztosítva a régiók fenntartható fejlődését és versenyképességét. A kohéziós politikának nem csak a beruházásokat és a strukturális reformokat kell támogatnia a tagállamok prioritásaihoz igazodva, hanem kiemelten kell foglalkoznia a demográfiai kihívásokkal is, ugyanis ezek általánosan érintik, főleg a rurális helyi közösségeket. A népességcsökkenés, az előregedés, a munkaerő elvándorlása és a belső agyelszívás olyan problémák, amelyek súlyosan hátráltatják számos régió fejlődését. Éppen ezért az Európai Unió Tanácsának magyar elnöksége szeptember 6-án informális miniszteri találkozót szervezett a témában Budapesten. Az ülésen a tagállamok a kohéziós politika demográfiai kihívások kezelésében betöltött szerepéről folytattak eszmecserét, amelyet témában készítendő tanácsi következtetéseink alapjául szolgálnak. Magyar részről elnökségi célunk, hogy a tanácsi következtetések révén a demográfiai kihívásokra a kohéziós politika keretein belül találjunk megoldásokat, erősítve ezzel a politika 2027 utáni fennmaradásának indokait. Ezen túlmenően arra is törekszünk, hogy a 2025-ben várható uniós kohéziós jogszabályjavaslatok kapcsán irányt mutassunk a bizottság számára, lehetővé téve, hogy a jövőbeni kohéziós forrásokból még szélesebb körben lehessen támogatást nyújtani. A 9. kohéziós jelentés is nyomatékosan aláhúzza a kohéziós politika hozzáadott értékét és jövőbeni fenntartásának szükségességét. A politikát az európai projekt kulcsfontosságú pillérének nevezi, ami a hosszú távú növekedés és versenyképesség motorjaként hozzájárult a belső piac jobb működéséhez. A makrogazdasági modellszimulációk alapján a kohéziós politika 2014-2020-as és 2021-2027-es beruházási programjai várhatóan 2030-ra, a programok végrehajtási időszakának végéig közel 1%-kal növelik az Európai Unió GDP-jét. Számos tanulmány és értékelés rávilágított arra, hogy a kohéziós politika jelentős hatással volt az uniós régiók társadalmi-gazdasági fejlődésére, különösen a kevésbé fejlett területeken. A becslések szerint ezekben a régiókban a GDP 2030-ra várhatóan több mint 10%-kal lesz magasabb, mintha nem részesültek volna a kohéziós politika támogatásában. Ezáltal a kohéziós politika hozzájárul a regionális egyenlőtlenségek mérsékléséhez, mind az uniós, mind az egyes tagállamokon belüli szinten. A kohéziós politika tehát továbbra is kulcsfontosságú szerepet játszik a társadalmi-gazdasági konvergencia elősegítésében, valamint az egységes piachoz való hozzáférés javításában, mind a jelenlegi, mind a jövőbeli Európai Uniós tagállamok számára. Fontos kérdés a felzárkóztatási politika mellett, hogy a potenciálisan versenyképes régiókat hogyan lehet valóban versenyképessé tenni. Ahogy arra Enrico Letta is kitért a jelentésében, fontos a helyben maradás lehetőségeinek megteremtése. Összpontosítani kell arra, hogy a tagállamoknak legyenek eszközeik többek között az agyelszívás jelenségének megakadályozására és a képzett munkaerő megtartására, ami a versenyképesség egyik fontos pillére. Köszönöm a figyelmüket!
Nagyon köszönjük miniszter úr felszólalását és tájékoztatását. Megállapítom, hogy jelenleg 20 felszólalási igény érkezett, így hát most önöket illeti a felszólalás lehetősége. Ez 2 perces lesz, tehát 120 másodperc áll mindenkinek a rendelkezésére. Én ekkor ezzel a kis haranggal jelezni fogom a idő leteltét, és akkor még módjukban áll a mondat befejezésére, azt követően pedig a technikus kollégák el fogják venni a hangot. Elsőként Juhászka Hajnalkának fogom megadni a szót, az Európai Ügyek Bizottsága tagjának, a Külügyi Bizottság alelnökének. Parancsoljon.
Dear Mr. Minister, dear Mr. Chair, dear colleagues, cohesion policy has always been the EU tailor-made masterpiece to tackle economic and territorial inequalities between regions of the member states. We firmly believe that determined cohesion policy goals should remain to be reached through cohesion funds, therefore we do not support the creation of new instruments. The 9th cohesion report revealed that there is still much to do in terms of regional disparities. With more than 100 million EU citizens still living in regions under the Union average development level, the convergence of these regions is key for proper functioning of the single market. Let me recall that the cohesion policy itself has a stimulating factor towards the European competitiveness. Let me stress also another key aspect. Demographic challenges have wide-ranging effect on social, territorial and intergenerational cohesion of the European Union, especially in sparsely populated rural and remote regions. These regions are often the ones which are left behind. We are on the opinion that the cohesion policy under the next multi-annual financial framework should keep addressing the challenges deriving from regional imbalances and demographic challenges to offer a brighter perspective in this field. Finally, let me reiterate that the Hungarian National Assembly adopted a set of laws last year to unblock the suspended part of the cohesion funds dedicated to Hungary. Later, some parts of the frozen fund were disbursed to Hungary, but the process hasn't been closed yet. So, Mr. Minister, may I question to you, will it ever be possible to keep cohesion policy less ideology-driven and treat member states equally? Thank you very much indeed.
Köszönöm szépen. A következő felszólalónk a lengyel Szejm delegáció vezetőjeként Izabella Bodnár. Parancsoljon.
Distinguished Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, individual European Union countries are facing serious challenges today. The most important is increase defense capabilities in face of Russia's aggressive policy, supporting Ukraine, supporting climate transformation and demographic issues, especially the population and aging societies. These are our common problems, which is why we must jointly seek solutions that will increase our security, integration, competitiveness, and consequently the quality of European Union citizens. For European integration to develop, we must apply the mechanism of shared management and joint responsibility in conducting pro-development activities, which is widely known from cohesion policy. An adequate budget is also necessary dedicated to achieving cohesion, especially in the context from planned EU enlargement. For the European Union to build its competitiveness, it must invest in the economic potential for all countries, not only the most developed ones. The EU single market is not perfect and may lead to uneven development in the European Union. We do not live in ideal world. The Union cannot guarantee equal living standards and economic opportunities throughout the Union, which is why cohesion policy is necessary to ensure that all citizens can benefit from market integration, regardless of where in Europe they live. At least developed regions are the most susceptible to the adverse effect of global issues, and also need greater support to level out development differences, including those related to functioning of the common market or to the implementation of European Union's ambitious development goals. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen. Erotokritu elnök asszony következik Ciprusból.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The new MFF will focus on how to finance both current and emerging EU priorities the green and digital transitions, the demographic challenges, as well as enhancing EU's competitiveness and strategic autonomy. Considering, though, the prospect of EU enlargement, we should approach the new MFF cautiously, as current member states are already facing substantial development challenges that should not be overlooked. Therefore, cohesion policy funds should not simply be redirected to new members, but instead, policies must be designed to address the specific needs of all regions, ensuring fair and balanced support. We must ensure that the size of the cohesion policy in the new MFF is sufficient to benefit both existing and incoming members, because, paradoxically, although the EU's challenges and priorities are expanding, its budgetary capacity remains limited. This imbalance calls for a rationalization of funding instruments and the effective use of cohesion funds by strengthening mechanisms for monitoring and evaluating the impact of cohesion spending. Transparency, accountability, and good governance are essential and crucial in maintaining public trust and the legitimacy of cohesion policy, which, at the end of the day, in these current times that we're living, seems that it will have many more future challenges to meet. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen. Lói bizottsági elnök úr következik, Finnország. Parancsoljon.
Mr. Chair, dear colleagues, I would like to bring up the special issue which deals with cohesion policy. Finland considers it very important that EU funding could be allocated to mitigating the adverse effects of the closed eastern border in the future multi-annual financial framework. But not only in the next multinational financial framework, but also already before that, we should find the right instruments to resolve this special question. I want to emphasize that this does not apply only to Finland, where I come from, but also to all EU countries that share a common border with Russia and also more widely. In particular, the vitality of the provinces and regions located in border areas is a security issue for the entire EU and should be taken into account in the funding frameworks. Russia's war of aggression into Ukraine and the closing of the eastern border have long-term effects on strengthening livelihoods, skilled labor, energy production, investments, as well as overall security and security of supply. I would like to draw attention to the fact that the spillover effects of the war in Ukraine have also strongly affected the possibilities of rural development on the eastern border. The issue of the eastern border regions is indeed broader than cohesion policy.
Iszka Miallova képviselőasszony következik Bulgáriából, parancsoljon. Egy kis türelmet kérünk, a mikrofont hozzá a kedves kollega. Parancsoljon, elnézést.
First of all, I would like to thank to the Hungarian Presidency of the Council of the European Union for the invitation and opportunity to participate in this very important conference. To congratulate the organizers for the choice of items in our agenda and for the logic in this agenda, from opportunities to the process of investment and financial discipline, and to express my appreciation of the position of Hungarian presidency on the cohesion policy of the European Union. It is the right time to begin the conversation about the future multi-annual financial framework and about the goals and context of the future cohesion policy. Cohesion policy is one of the symbols of the practical instrument of the European solidarity. In policy and related instrument was designed in late previous century. It is time to change the policy. Allow me to mention few directions in which I think we have to work together: national parliament, European Parliament, and Commission. These are national specifics and demographic issues, more focused on results from investment policy, simplification of the policy, and efficient coordination between the cohesion policy and other European instruments for investment and national investment instruments. Thank you very much.
Köszönjük szépen, és elnézést kérünk a mikrofon hibájáért. Kafkalias bizottsági elnök úr következik Ciprusból, parancsoljon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, the cohesion policy should not be simply a financing mechanism, but the cornerstone of European integration and solidarity between the member states. By supporting the less developed regions, the cohesion policy promotes social and economic convergence, contributing to the balanced development and prosperity of the entire European Union. However, its contribution to the achievement of the EU's strategic objectives is undeniable. Through targeted investment, it has promoted competitiveness, social inclusion, the green and digital transition, as well as industrial transformation across the EU. Nevertheless, challenges and inequalities still remain. It is clear that ongoing investments in structural measures aim at enhancing competitiveness, creating quality jobs, and providing equal development opportunities are essential. It is also crucial that the cohesion policy is updated to address contemporary challenges. The current budget is evidently insufficient to tackle the complex challenges we face today, including the green and digital transitions, demographic shifts, and the management of migration. As such, strengthening the cohesion policy must be a top priority in discussions surrounding the next multi-annual financial framework. Dear colleagues, a strong and adequately funded cohesion policy turns challenges into opportunities and inequalities into prospects for development. Essentially, by investing in cohesion, we are investing in a more just, more competitive, resilient, and prosperous Europe for the benefit of all its citizens. Thank you very much.
Ana Mendes Godinho asszony következik a portugál bizottsági elnökként. Parancsoljon.
Dear Chair, dear colleagues, in the last years, we were able to stand together and overcome the unprecedented challenge of a global pandemic, and we did it together. We were able to build a united European response that did put people first. Let us not forget. 3 years ago, we were able to join all our forces at the Porto Social Summit in Portugal, and we made a strong commitment to assume that the European Pillar of Social Rights is the backbone that unites us all. This was not just a statement. This was a concrete promise to people with concrete results, safeguarding millions of jobs and protecting lives. And it did work, let us not forget. We all have a huge responsibility in this room, in Europe, for the times that we are facing. The new rules recognize that investment in people is exactly the crucial driver for Europe, growth and competitiveness. The answers from the pandemic showed that we can and we must do better than we did before, and time is running out. We cannot jeopardize our children. We cannot jeopardize our young generations. We cannot jeopardize our workers that have jobs indeed in danger. Like during COVID, the times are again very challenging and they call for our common action. This is why it is urgent, like Draghi defends in his report, a new European instrument to invest in the critical transitions that we are facing, or we will lose people and Europe will break apart. We need a strong, permanent instrument that can in a massive way support millions of jobs in transition and that can at the same time prepare workers for the new jobs on digital and green. Together, we can put this European instrument tool into action. We need again a courageous Europe to act. Let us not live in the past.
Köszönjük szépen. Hagedorn asszony következik Németországból. Parancsoljon.
Ja, liebe Kolleginnen, liebe Kollegen, ich darf da anschließen, wo unsere Kollegin gerade geendet hat. Ja, wir brauchen ein mutiges Europa, eins, das nicht zurückschaut und eins, das optimistisch ist und eine Zukunft für die jungen Leute in Europa bietet und für die Länder, die zu uns nach Europa kommen wollen, in unsere gemeinsame Gemeinschaft. Das ist richtig. Aber auf der anderen Seite haben wir auch darüber gesprochen, dass Schuldenmachen nicht per se eine gute Idee ist, weil wir ja auch an die Zukunft der nächsten Generation denken müssen. Und wir alle wissen, ein Stück weit ist das die Quadratur des Kreises. Und weil das so ist, will ich deutlich sagen, dass Kohäsionspolitik sich bewährt hat in Europa, aber immer auch einem Wandel unterlegen war. Als in Deutschland noch die Mauer stand, da haben auch unsere grenznahen Regionen Mittel aus Europa bekommen. Und seit die Mauer gefallen ist, Gott sei Dank, brauchen sie es nicht mehr. Darum kann ich meinem Kollegen aus Finnland recht geben. Wir müssen der neuen geopolitischen Lage auch in Europa gerecht werden. Und das heißt auch, dass wir uns ausrichten müssen auf die Sicherheitslage. Denn die Freiheit, die wir in Europa haben, die Demokratie, die wir in Europa haben, die ist ohne Sicherheit nichts. Und zwar ohne innere und ohne äußere Sicherheit. Und daran muss sich auch ein Stück weit der mittelfristige Finanzplan mit orientieren, mit diesen neuen Rahmenbedingungen. Und ich möchte uns alle daran erinnern, dass Europa nie so viel Geld zur Verfügung hatte wie gerade jetzt, weil wir nicht nur den mittelfristigen Finanzrahmen, sondern auch Next Generation EU haben. Und das ist konzentriert auf die Digitalisierung und auf den Kampf des Klimawandels mit 37 und 20%. Und damit haben die Nationalstaaten die Möglichkeit und die Verantwortung, gerade jetzt ganz viel in ihren Ländern zu leisten, um die Wege, um die Weichen für die Zukunft gut zu stellen. Vielen Dank.
Köszönjük szépen. Puisztó bizottsági elnök urat illeti a szó Finnországból. Parancsoljon.
Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, first I would like to thank Hungary for organizing this conference. This event in this splendid House of the Parliament has given us a good glimpse of Hungarian culture and history too. Regarding cohesion policy, negotiations on EU enlargement are in progress, and this means that the geographical focus of cohesion policy would shift towards the east. In the meanwhile, the geopolitical situation regarding Russia is tense. And therefore, I think that when modernizing the cohesion policy and its resource allocation criteria, the member states should emphasize the importance of the Union's external border areas. Already in Finland, some of these areas, they are sparsely populated with declining demographic conditions, and they need investment and economic dynamism. And therefore, I think that the emphasis on these issues on external border areas would serve certainly the whole security of Europe as a whole. Thank you very much.
Szanya Lukarevszka asszonyt illeti a szó, elnök asszonyt Észak-Macedóniából. Parancsoljon.
Thank you. Dear Chairman, dear fellow members of national parliaments, the negative impact of COVID-19 and the war aggression has made it difficult to plan national budgets and manage public finances in general. The Republic of North Macedonia also felt the negative effects of this crisis on its economy and the planning and management of public finances, which contributed to the delay of investments in infrastructure, the balanced regional development of the state, education, energy, environmental protection, and other areas. Regarding the cohesion policy, the Republic of North Macedonia, a candidate country for EU membership, has received significant financial support, both from the European Commission and bilaterally from the EU member states, for which I would like to express my gratitude. Financial support made it possible to make significant reforms in several sectors in order to fulfill the necessary criteria of EU membership, as well as the improved cross-border cooperation with EU members. The European Commission adopted the Economic Growth Plan for the Western Balkan countries in November 2023, while the European Parliament and the Council approved it in April and May 2024. It is a package of 6 billion euros, of which 2 billion in the form of grants and 4 billion as loans until 2027. The growth plan is based on 4 main pillars. The main goal of the plan for 2024-2027 is to make some of the benefits of EU membership available to the citizens of the Western Balkan countries in the pre-accession period, that is before their membership in the EU. According to the growth plan, each country must adopt a reform agenda, will represent a comprehensive and coherent package of quantity and qualitative measures to achieve the intended goals. Thank you for your attention.
Köszönjük szépen, Thomas Geisel urat illeti a szó, Európai Parlament parancsolja.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, I guess when we look at cohesion policy in the past, this is a history of significant success. When we listen to the Commissioner Ferreira and to her message, and when we look at the numbers, I think the differences in prosperity, the differences in economic development between member states have been reduced quite significantly. However, what we can see, there's a new challenge arising within the member states, and I refer to the differences between the well-developed urban metropolitan areas and rural areas. I think there's an increasing difference. There is also people leaving. There's rural areas. There's a significant demographic challenge that we're facing, and this is something we need to address, I strongly believe. And this is, maybe there is a link between what we discussed in the first session and this session. This is mostly a matter of investment. I mean, it's a matter of accessibility of rural areas. It's a matter of developing transportation infrastructure. It is even more so a matter of developing digital infrastructure. I guess a digital infrastructure is key for economic development nowadays. And therefore, we need to enable member states to redress these problems, and they're different in each member state, but I guess in the essence, they're fairly similar. So the role of the European Union should be more to provide framework conditions that member states can do that. When we look at transportation grids, when we look at digital grids, also when we look at energy grids, these are natural monopolies. They need to be developed not according to profitability, but according to equal development in each and every member state. And this is something where Europe also needs to look at, that this is possible, and it is also refers to certain state aid schemes that should be handled maybe more liberally to, as I said, address the big issue of cohesion also within each individual member state. Thank you very much.
Peter Aki úr következik Görögországból, parancsoljon.
Dear colleagues, it is clear that the European Union needs to use its budget in an efficient way. Obviously, cohesion remains a key priority. So is the need to support our farmers, as Europe needs to be more self-reliant. Recent geopolitical challenges highlight also the need for increased budget allocation for defense, common European defense, for migration management and energy efficiency, and obviously for new investments. It's a huge challenge. In this difficult environment, we need to increase the amount allocated to cohesion policy in the next multi-annual financial framework, as highlighted in the recent report on cohesion policy. We need to note that disparities among the regions remain a challenge. Regions like the North Aegean, where GDP per capita was 11.9 thousand euros in the latest Eurostat regional statistic, need increased support, especially as these regions have faced considerable headwind from the migration crisis. Funds need to leverage local capabilities and provide for sustainable economic growth and employment. Increasing regional competitiveness and promoting innovation needs to drive our funding priorities and attracting private sector capital to underdeveloped regions. In closing, I would also like to thank the Hungarian Presidency for organizing this event. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen. Hugo Carneiro urat illeti a szó, Portugáliából, parancsoljon.
Mr. Chair, dear colleagues, cohesion policy has been vital in promoting the development of less advantaged regions in the EU. Only a strong and unified Europe will be capable of facing the global challenge ahead. One such challenge is how the EU should position itself concerning other major economic blocs. An important question raises: how can we continue financing and strengthening cohesion policy? China, for example, heavily subsidizes its local companies to compete in Europe, creating disparities that undermine fair competition. Recently, the EU introduced a directive on Pillar 2, establishing a global minimum tax of 15%, allowing member states to implement a qualified domestic minimum top-up tax. Given that China's advantages come from public subsidies, not tax competition, I propose for reflection a different approach to implementing the key DMTT within the EU. If a portion of the key DMTT collected by each member state were directed to a shared EU fund, we could reinforce cohesion funds. Estimates suggest that implementing Pillar 2 could generate up to 67 billion euros in additional corporate taxes in the EU. A portion of this amount could be allocated annually to promote cohesion policy. Additionally, some argue for a relaxation of state aid rules without compromising the treaty to ease our capacity to implement many of the strategic investments we need. This could ensure that all member states can compete on a level playing field. At the same time, assure that equal opportunities prevent the rise of populism. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen. Luigi Spagnoli úr következik Olaszországból. Parancsoljon.
Signor Presidente, colleghi, la politica di coesione è tuttora il principale strumento di investimento dell'Unione per promuovere un'integrazione solidale e ridurre il divario tra i diversi livelli di sviluppo delle sue varie regioni, anche quelle montane. Vengo dall'Alto Adige Südtirol e so di cosa parlo. Le differenze economiche e sociali in Europa sono forti, ma dobbiamo superarle tutti insieme. La politica di coesione è un pilastro fondamentale per il futuro dell'Unione Europea insieme alla politica agricola. L'Italia è fortemente convinta della necessità di aumentare gli stanziamenti dei fondi di coesione nel bilancio dell'Unione, perché dobbiamo affrontare le sfide del futuro, quelle legate ai cambiamenti climatici, con una transizione ecologica capillare ma attenta ai bisogni correnti delle popolazioni umane, quella relativa ai nuovi sviluppi tecnologici, implementando sempre più la transizione digitale. In entrambi i casi ci vogliono risorse aggiuntive rispetto a quelle del bilancio ordinario. Risorse aggiuntive da reperire, come dice il rapporto di Mario Draghi sul futuro della competitività europea, mediante l'emissione di titoli di debito comune europeo, come già fatto in modo innovativo ed efficace con il Next Generation EU o con i social bonds del programma SURE, ovvero mediante Eurobonds o targeted bonds circoscritti e finalizzati al raggiungimento di specifici e determinati obiettivi con la necessaria flessibilità. L'Europa, è già stato detto, sta accumulando Da anni un ritardo nei confronti degli Stati Uniti e della Cina nel finanziamento degli investimenti produttivi. Secondo il rapporto Draghi occorrerebbe mobilitare circa il 5% del PIL europeo, 800 miliardi di euro, di cui almeno metà per investimenti pubblici, con un effetto di trascinamento sugli investimenti privati, privilegiando il livello regionale. Questa, secondo l'Italia, è la direzione. Grazie, thank you. Köszönöm.
Köszönjük szépen. Oljana Kopancsuk asszonyt illeti a szó, bizottsági alelnök Ukrajnából. Parancsoljon!
I would like to thank the Hungary presidency for the invitation to participate in this important conference. Ukraine aspires to become a full-fledged member of a free, strong, and peaceful Europe. Ukraine's accession to the European Union will benefit the Hungarian national minority, opening new opportunities for its social and economic development. We appreciate Hungary's constructive approach to pre-accession negotiations and look forward to your support for Ukraine. It's very important for us. Our priority areas include restoring Ukraine's economy through the collaboration between Ukraine and leading European companies. And then, Russia's military aggression is not only against Ukraine, it is against whole democratic Europe. Having swallowed Ukraine, Russia will come to Hungary, Poland, Romania. The aggressive and inhuman behavior of Moscow in Ukraine clearly shows that it will never change. We must stop Russia before it is too late. Thank you.
Jean-Marie Mizon, francia szenátort illeti a szó, parancsolja.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mes chers collègues, l'importance de la politique de cohésion partout en Europe n'est plus à démontrer. Aussi, j'aborderai ce sujet sous un double angle, national puis européen. Dans une perspective nationale, la politique de cohésion est une politique importante pour la France, dans la mesure où notre pays est à la fois un contributeur net, mais également l'un des principaux bénéficiaires, notamment dans nos régions ultramarines. C'est parce que je connais les apports des priorités communautaires que je regrette la sous-consommation chronique de ces crédits, trop souvent imputable à la lourdeur de ces procédures. Les fonds de cohésion sont aujourd'hui trop nombreux et leurs modalités multiples et complexes, difficiles à appréhender au niveau local. Ceci crée du non-recours dans nos collectivités, particulièrement chez celles qui en ont le plus besoin, ainsi que d'importants coûts de gestion. C'est pourquoi je suis sensible, dans une perspective européenne, à l'initiative de Madame la Commissaire qui constate l'urgence de réformer la politique de cohésion afin qu'elle soit davantage axée sur les projets et leur pertinence et moins bureaucratique pour les candidats à ces fonds. La recherche de la performance ne saurait toutefois signifier une centralisation de la politique de cohésion. En effet, la politique européenne ne sera véritablement efficace que si elle est en phase avec les politiques menées au niveau local. Ce sont les collectivités qui connaissent le mieux les besoins de leur territoire. Il appartient à l'Union européenne de leur proposer des dispositifs plus simples afin qu'elles puissent répondre à ces besoins. Je dirais pour conclure que c'est parce que la politique de cohésion est à la fois une politique de compétitivité qui favorise le progrès profitable à tous et une politique de solidarité qui favorise la cohésion de nos différentes nations, qu'elle doit être continue et renforcée. Merci de votre attention.
José María Sánchez úr következik, spanyol képviselő, parancsoljon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. En primer lugar, quiero manifestar nuestro apoyo al gobierno húngaro ante la suspensión del desembolso de fondos que sufre por razones ideológicas, como nos ha recordado hoy nuestro presidente. En segundo lugar, vuelvo a la cuestión sobre la que hablé esta mañana. Es decir, me resulta muy difícil entender cómo pueda haber coherencia entre el cumplimiento de las nuevas reglas fiscales en materia de déficit y de deuda y una pretensión de endeudamiento anual por importe de más de 5 puntos del Producto Interior Bruto de la Unión Europea, según el informe Draghi. Me parece que hay una contradicción interna insalvable. Se ha dicho aquí que dispondremos de más dinero que nunca para la cohesión europea. Creo que dispondremos más dinero que nunca porque nos habremos endeudado más que nunca y, por lo tanto, estaremos en contradicción con las nuevas reglas fiscales. Por último, y termino, la zona euro puso de manifiesto claramente que la unidad de divisa en un territorio sin homogeneidad económica era un peligro. Y si no, que se lo pregunten a nuestros colegas griegos, que son los que principalmente lo han sufrido. Por lo tanto, esta cuestión de la cohesión, pensando en el futuro de la ampliación de la Unión Europea, ¿qué significa? ¿Que vamos a seguir con esta idea extravagante de incorporar al territorio de la Unión Europea zonas que no guardan homogeneidad económica con la que es la media europea, que ya de suyo es poco homogénea? Nada más, gracias.
A szlovák parlament képviseletében Skripek úr következik. Parancsolja. Egy kis türelmet kérek, és a kollega viszi a mikrofont, elnézést.
Dear honourable members, concerning European policies and their financing, we know that enlargement will have the greatest impact on the EU budget, cohesion policy and the common agricultural policy. For Slovakia, it will be crucial to focus on how the so-called traditional policies will adapt to the enlarged EU. We strongly support elevating cohesion policy higher in the EU strategic agenda. We believe this policy should remain a priority within the EU as it plays a vital role in strengthening regional cohesion, convergence and resilience. Slovakia welcomes the Council conclusions on the 9th report, notably with regard to the crucial role of cohesion policy in promoting economic stability and convergence across EU regions, and appreciates the emphasis on flexibility to address specific challenges of regions. We believe this policy should remain a priority within the EU as it plays a crucial role in strengthening regional cohesion and resilience. In order to ensure the fulfillment of the strategic objectives of the EU through cohesion policy in the post-2027 period, we emphasize the need for the inclusion of all EU regions, taking into account the specific needs of each region while ensuring systematic monitoring and evaluation. Regions should be included in the implementation of the future priorities of the strategic agenda. At the same time, we call on EU institutions to strictly adhere to the principle of subsidiarity and not impose conditions on projects that fall within the exclusive decision-making competencies of Member States. Similarly, there is a need to ensure a sufficient budget for the future cohesion policy 2028-2034 to address current strategic priorities such as green and digital transformation, industrial transformation, and strategic autonomy, as well as future challenges as demographic trends, talent leakage, and the impact of the future enlargement of the EU. Thank you for your attention.
A felszólalók sorában végül pedig Nikola Radosavljević úrnak, bizottsági alelnök úrnak adom meg a szót Szerbiából, parancsoljon.
Thank you very much, dear chairman, dear colleagues. Na samom početku želio bih da se zahvalim Mađarskoj, želio bih da kažem da je put Srbije put ka Evropskoj uniji i da je na osnovu toga Ministarstvo privrede Republike Srbije još 15. maja 2024. godine poslalo dopis Ministarstvu za evropske integracije, kojim je Ministarstvo za evropske integracije preko misije Republike Srbije pri Ujedinjenim nacijama u Briselu obavestilo Evropsku komisiju da je Republika Srbija zainteresovana za pokretanje pregovora za potpisivanje ACAA sporazuma za sljedeće grupe proizvoda: električna, elektronska oprema, mašine, lična zaštitna oprema. Ovaj sporazum ima za cilj olakšanje pristupa industrijskih proizvoda između Evropske unije i Republike Srbije radi jačanja konkurentnosti srpske privrede i omogućavanje daljeg napretka o postupanju pregovaranja o pristupanju Republike Srbije Evropskoj uniji u oblasti pregovaračkog poglavlja 1. Thank you very much.
Köszönöm szépen, ezennel a felszólalások végére értünk. Tisztelettel kérem fel miniszter urat, hogy reagáljon az elhangzottakra és válaszoljon a feltett kérdésekre innét a pulpitusról. Köszönöm szépen.
Tisztelt elnök úr, tisztelt képviselőtársaim! Azt hiszem, ez a vita is jól mutatta azt, hogy milyen sokszínű uniónak vagyunk a tagjai, milyen sokféle szempontot tudunk megjeleníteni, és milyen sokféle szemszögből tudjuk ugyanazt a közös célt megfogalmazni. Köszönöm szépen mindenkinek a hozzájárulását, és köszönöm szépen azt, hogy szemmel láthatóan készen állnak arra a közös erőfeszítésre, amely az Európai Uniót versenyképesebbé teszi a jövőben. A kohéziós politikának ebben óriási szerepe van, hiszen a kohéziós politika, ahogyan Enrico Letta a jelentésében is megfogalmazta, az a politika, amely a stabil hátországot biztosítja a gazdaság versenyképességéhez, azáltal, hogy a szociális és regionális különbségeket csökkenti, és a tagállamok társadalmát és politikáit is erősíti. Minél nagyobb a tagállamok versenyképessége, annál erősebb az Európai Unió. Ezért is érthetetlen politikai és ideológiai okokból büntetni egy-egy tagállamot, megvonni tőle a forrásokat, mert ez nem csak az adott tagállam versenyképességét, de az egész Európai Unió gazdaságának versenyképességét aknázza alá. Számunkra a kohéziós politika nem ideológiai kérdés. Egy olyan pragmatikus szakpolitikáról van szó, ahol marginalizálódott társadalmi csoportokat, leszakadóban lévő régiókat kell felzárkóztatni, az életszínvonalat kell növelni, az infrastruktúrát kell fejleszteni, összességében azért, hogy az adott tagállam erősebb és versenyképesebb legyen, és így összességében az egész Európai Unió erősebb és versenyképesebb legyen. Magyarország a 2014-2020-as pénzügyi kerettervben az uniós források felhasználása terén az első 3 legjobban teljesítő tagállam közé tartozott. A 2021-27-es pénzügyi kerettervben, a mostani pénzügyi kerettervben is úgy, hogy 3 területen a források 55%-a fel van függesztve, így is a 8. legjobb eredményt hozza az Európai Uniós tagállamok között. Mindez azt is mutatja, hogy nem csak megbecsüljük és jól hasznosítjuk az Európai Uniós adófizetők pénzét, de érdekeltek is vagyunk az együttműködésben. Nem csak azért, hogy a magyar társadalom kohéziója magasabb szintű legyen, hanem azért is, hogy az Európai Unió erősebb legyen. Ahogyan Enrico Letta a jelentésében rámutatott, a kohéziós politikát ma rengeteg politikai kihívás éri. A kedvezőtlen gazdasági környezet, az Európai Unió gyengülő versenyképessége, amelyről Mario Draghi írt, vagy éppen a bővítés általunk teljes erőből támogatott célkitűzése mind-mind olyan nyomást jelent a kohéziós politikára, amely azt jelenti, hogy amikor a kohéziós politika jövőjéről beszélünk, akkor okosan kell megválogatnunk azokat a szempontokat, amelyeket érvényesítünk. Az egyszerűsítés, a rugalmasság, a szubszidiaritás, a partnerség mind-mind olyan szempontok, amelyek visszacsengenek az önök hozzászólásaiból is. Én úgy gondolom, hogy ebbe az irányba kell elmozdulnunk a jövőben, ügyelve arra, hogy más szakpolitikai célkitűzések ne emésszék föl a kohéziós politikai céljaira rendelt pénzügyi eszközöket. Mindannyian érdekeltek vagyunk egy erős és szolidáris Európai Unióban. Abban bízom, hogy a magyar elnökség a maga részéről sokat tud tenni a hátralévő hónapokban azért, hogy az elkövetkező pénzügyi kerettervből a kohéziós politika ne gyengébb, hanem erősebb pozícióval kerüljön ki. Köszönöm szépen a figyelmüket.
Köszönjük szépen miniszter úr válaszait, ahogyan azt is, hogy személyesen vett részt a konferenciánkon. Most pedig nem csak a harmadik napirendi pontot, de egyúttal a kétnapos konferenciát is le kell zárnunk. Kérem Vajda Zoltán bizottsági elnök urat, tartsa meg záró beszédét innét a pulpitusról.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, he's not here. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, and dear guests, first I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to all of you for honoring this conference with your presence. Over the past 2 days, we have been enriched by not only productive discussions, but also, in my opinion, truly insightful ideas and proposals that can contribute to building our shared future and strengthening our common Europe. We have had the opportunity to engage in these discussions in a special environment. The Parliament building is not only a significant part of Hungary's history and national culture, but also one of the gems of Europe's built heritage. Within these walls, decisions of historic importance have been made over the centuries, decisions that have served as milestones not only for Hungary, but for Central Europe and the broader European community as well. I am certain that you all have felt the weight of this historic place, where the connection between past and present is almost tangible. I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed your time in Budapest, this beautiful, wonderful, open city, and I believe that the city has left you with something lasting, not only through its beauty, but also its spirit. During this conference, we have addressed 3 important topics that are crucial for all of us, not only at the national level, but at the European Union level as a whole. First, we discussed the growing importance of electric vehicles. E-mobility is an area that will be significant for European competitiveness in the future. For the EU to take a leading role in this area, comprehensive decision-making and supporting programs are required so that our industry can not only keep pace with global competitors, but also set the direction. It is in our shared interest that the European automotive industry becomes a pioneer in sustainable mobility, thereby preserving the continent's economic strength. In the second session that I had the honor of chairing, we focused on the reform of the economic governance framework, which is crucial for the future financial stability of the Union. Because while the EU has built its economic system on solid foundations, The challenges of a changing world call for reconsideration. We must respond to these challenges together, because only in this way can we ensure that our economic system remains more resilient, flexible, and sustainable in the long run. And lastly, in this session, we discussed the EU budget dedicated to cohesion policy and its impact on the multi-annual financial framework, another issue of utmost importance. One of the greatest strengths of the European Union is its solidarity, which takes shape in the form of cohesion policy. This policy ensures that every member state benefits from the economic and social advantages provided by the community, and that the development opportunities of all regions are fully realized. When shaping the multi-annual financial framework, we must give special attention to ensuring that these funds serve sustainable development and competitiveness as effectively as possible. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, these discussions highlight that while the European Union faces significant challenges, it is also presented with its tremendous opportunities. However, again, we can only seize these opportunities through cooperation, us together. The essence of the EU lies precisely in this: a union that draws strength from its diversity, where national and EU interests are balanced, and where competitive advantage is paired with solidarity. The European Union is a community that, even in the most difficult times, has been able to come together and look ahead. This conference has generated numerous valuable ideas and proposals, all of which point in the same direction. Europe must strengthen its economic, political, and social cohesion to remain competitive on the global stage and to preserve the well-being of its citizens. The future of Europe will only be successful if our decisions are sustainable in the long term and if we proactively address the challenges ahead. On a personal note, I would like to thank all of you for your active participation, for the constructive and insightful debates, and for the commitment you have shown to these timely and important issues. In conclusion, I hope that today's discussions have not only served to build professional relationships, but also personal ones, and that the dialogue we have started here will continue. The proposals and exchanges that took place during this conference go far beyond these beautiful walls, as in the coming months and years, these ideas may shape the policies of the European Union. And lunch is nearby, so all I want to ask you is to thank you for your attention. I wish you all success in your future work, and have a safe journey back home. Thank you so much.
Köszönöm szépen, bizottsági elnök úr, és akkor most megadnám a szót a lengyel delegációnak, parancsoljanak.
Dear all distinguished guests, at the end, almost the end of the conference, I have a great honor and pleasure to invite all of you to the next conference as a part of Polish presidency. The conference will take place in Brussels 17 and 18 February as a part of European Parliamentary Week. Details regarding the topics you will be provided later on. Thank you very much one more time for inspiring discussion here, a lot of conversation, a lot of interesting ideas. We can exchange the fantastic idea. I cordially invite you and hope to meet you again, everybody, with the wonderful group in Brussels in February. Thank you very much.
Köszönöm szépen, delegációvezető asszony, kedves szavait. Megállapítom, hogy a most lezárásra kerülő kétnapos konferenciánk visszaigazolta, hogy az Európai Unión belüli parlamentközi együttműködésnek hasznos, ha van egy gazdaságpolitikai, költségvetési fóruma is. Igaz, hogy egy kormányközi szerződés hozta létre ezt az együttműködést, de fontos, hogy ne csak általában uniós politikáról egyeztessünk, hanem arról, hogy hogyan tudjuk régiónk versenyképességét, kohézióját növelni. Hazánk, ahogyan hallhattuk, ebben az uniós költségvetési ciklusban 21,8 milliárd euró kohéziós támogatásra jogosult, amelyet a korábbi lezárt költségvetési ciklusok jó gyakorlatának megfelelően a jelen ciklusban is minden gazdasági és politikai nehézség ellenére a magyar emberek javára és érdekében hiánytalanul kívánunk felhasználni. Az Európai Ügyek Bizottsága elnökeként bejelentem, hogy bő 3 hét múlva e teremben adunk helyt a magyar EU elnökség parlamenti együttműködése legnagyobb eseményének, a 72. COSAC plenáris ülésnek, amelynek előkészítése már hónapok óta tart. Remélem, sokukkal akkor is találkozhatunk majd Budapesten. A COSAC találkozón az általános elnökségi és geopolitikai kérdések mellett 2 olyan kérdés is napirendre kerül, amely gazdasági szemüvegen keresztül is értékelhető. Az egyik ilyen Európa versenyképessége, a másik pedig a demográfiai kihívások Európában. Fontosnak tartjuk Európa versenyképességének helyreállításán dolgozni, hiszen tagadhatatlan tény, hogy Európa fokozatosan veszít globális versenyképességéből. Nagy a felelősségünk a zöld és digitális átállásban rejlő versenyképességi lehetőségekkel élni, és az átállás során a versenyképességi hatásokra kiemelten figyelni. Ezért szorgalmazza a magyar elnökség az úgynevezett versenyképességi megállapodás elfogadását, amelynek hangsúlyos elemei a technológiai semleges ipari stratégia megalkotása, valamint az európai termelékenység növelése. A demográfia terén a tagállamok felelőssége az elsődleges, különösen amikor családpolitikára gondolunk. Ugyanakkor az európai társadalmak fokozott idősödése, a vidék elnéptelenedése, a munkaerő hiány pedig mind olyan kérdések, amelyek egyre nagyobb jelentőséggel bírnak a versenyképesség és a közfinanszírozás fenntarthatósága szempontjából is. Meggyőződésünk, hogy európai szintű közös gondolkodást és cselekvést, a korábbi hibák beazonosítását és a működő jó gyakorlatok elterjesztését kell kitűznünk célul. Kedves képviselőtársaim! Köszönöm még egyszer figyelmüket és részvételüket. Egyúttal szeretném megköszönni a tolmácsok és a munkatársak segítségét, munkáját a konferencia előkészítésében és lebonyolításában. Végül pedig tisztelettel invitálom Önöket a vadászterembe, ahol büfé ebéddel szolgálunk. Köszönöm szépen megtisztelő figyelmüket!